Chapter 1458. Yin Shixiang's heart skipped a beat when he heard that He Zhichu had returned to the United States. He didn't waste any more time and quickly came out. He opened the car door and said anxiously to Hua Xiaoheng, "Major General Hua, the building manager just said that Professor He returned to the United States a few hours ago." Hua Xiaoheng narrowed his eyes and got out of the car. He quickly walked to the building manager and knocked on his counter. "Hand over the key to Professor He's apartment. The police are investigating the case." "Police? Police?" The building manager was shocked. "What law did Professor He break? You want to investigate him? This has nothing to do with you." Hua Xiaoheng waved his hand. Yin Shixiang quickly took out a police ID. The Special Operations Forces had a lot of IDs. They could take one whenever they needed it. The building manager looked at Yin Shixiang and said timidly, "You didn't show this ID just now." Yin Shixiang said nonchalantly, "The police are handling a case. I just wanted to test you." The building manager had no choice but to call the campus security department. After obtaining permission, he took Hua Xiaoheng and Yin Shixiang upstairs. Hua Xiaoheng and Yin Shixiang walked in after opening the door of Professor He's apartment. Everything in the room was in order, and there was an unfinished glass of red wine on the coffee table. It looked like he had just gone downstairs for a walk. It was impossible to tell that the people here had already gone to the United States. Why did He Zhichu suddenly return to the United States? Hua Xiaoheng didn't say a word and left He Zhichu's apartment with Yin Shixiang. After returning to the headquarters of the Special Operations Forces, Hua Xiaoheng instructed, "Inform a few people to keep an eye on B University. Inform me when He Zhichu returns. Also, have the North American field agents keep an eye on He Zhichu. He has residences in Boston and Washington." After some thought, Hua Xiaoheng added, "Also, keep an eye on the He family in South America. See if He Zhichu will return." Yin Shixiang memorized everything and quickly went to arrange the manpower. 10 minutes later, Yin Shixiang returned to report, "Major General Hua, the manpower has been arranged. B University, Boston and Washington in North America and South America are all in place." He then asked in confusion, "Why did Professor He suddenly return to the United States at this juncture? Is it related to Nianji's whereabouts?" Hua Xiaoheng clenched his fists and said calmly, "If it's not, then he has been too good at pretending these past 2 years. All the things he had done for Gu Nianji and the feelings he had shown, were they all fake? No matter what, He Zhichu would never harm Gu Nianji." Hua Xiaoheng was very sure of that. So even though he had many questions in his mind, he still waited patiently for He Zhichu's plane to arrive at the airport in the United States. It took 12 hours to fly from the imperial capital to the eastern United States. 4 or 5 hours had passed and getting to America was not as easy as going to Russia. By the time he finished all the paperwork, it would be too late to give chase. He was also worried that it was a trap like what happened in Tunguska, so he did not act rashly this time. Hua Xiaoheng instructed Zhao Liangzi to keep in touch with He Zhichu as he returned to his official residence. It was already midnight. With a sullen face, he went to the bedroom to get a few changes of clothes and returned to the office building. That night he did not sleep again. He took out all aspects related to the case and re-examined them to see if he had missed anything. Gu Nianji's diamond earrings had been thrown away, and her phone couldn't be located. It seemed like the other party either knew them very well, or they were their foreign counterparts. Because only those in the same trade as them could do things so meticulously. But if it was a foreign counterpart, it was impossible for him to be ignorant. One of the main tasks of the Special Operations Forces in the field abroad was to keep an eye on their foreign counterparts. If he hadn't noticed such a big thing, then Hua Xiaoheng, as the general commander, could commit suicide to atone for his sins. He had not done his job well at all. But excluding their foreign counterparts, who else could do it to this extent? He thought about it all the way. Every time he felt that there was a turning point, he would think of a new point of doubt. It was as if he had walked into a dead end. Hua Xiaoheng kept deducing from the form in front of him. It wasn't until a ray of dawn climbed onto his desk through the window crack that he realized it was already dawn. He looked at his watch. It was already past 6 o'clock. In 2 hours, He Zhichu's private plane should arrive on the east coast of the United States, right? The Special Operations Forces in North America had sent him flight information from several major airports on the east coast of the United States earlier, confirming that He Zhichu's plane would land at Boston International Airport. Hua Xiaoheng breathed a sigh of relief and planned to call He Zhichu as soon as his plane arrived at the airport. It was time for them to have a good talk. Looking at the rising sun outside the window, Hua Xiaoheng rubbed his temples and got up to lie on the sofa for a while. He immediately fell asleep. When he woke up again, 2 hours had passed. He Zhichu's plane should have landed by now. Hua Xiaoheng jumped up from the sofa and ordered Yin Shixiang, who had already arrived at work, to call He Jichu immediately. Yin Shixiang immediately dialed and found that it was still voicemail. No one answered the phone. Call the field and ask if He Jichu's plane has landed. Hua Xiaoheng crossed his arms and walked around the office. The Special Operations Forces field officer at Boston International Airport looked at the information display and said to Yin Shixiang, "The plane has just landed. I'll go and ask again." In the end, he went to the tarmac and came back with a livid face. He said to Yin Shixiang, "I was tricked by him. Professor He's private plane landed an hour ago, but he told the airport's air traffic control not to change the landing time. So the display still shows the original landing time." Yin Shixiang also felt that something was wrong when he heard this. He turned to look at Hua Xiaoheng and the corners of his mouth twitched. "Hua Xiao, Professor, he arrived in Boston an hour ago." "Then where is he?" Hua Xiaoheng stopped. "Why can't I get through to him?" Yin Shixiang shook his head with a bitter smile. "How would I know? He just won't pick up. Get little Zay to come over and change the number and IP address. I don't believe he won't pick up." Hua Xiaoheng punched the desk and gritted his teeth. "This He Jichu. What the hell is he doing?" Zhao Liangzi was also called over and began to use various methods to call He Jichu's phone. However, whether it was his phone or his landline, there was only voicemail. They tried for an entire hour until the status of He Jichu's phone suddenly changed to, "The number you have dialed is not in the service area." It was exactly the same situation as when they called Gu Nianji's phone. Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangzi looked at each other. They both had a bad feeling. Hua Xiaoheng's face was dark. He strode over and stood behind Zhao Liangzi. Just as he was about to see how he was tracking He Jichu's phone, his phone suddenly rang. He quickly took it out. Before he could swipe it open, he saw a text message pop up. It was actually from He Jichu. "He Jichu, I'm going home. I'm never coming back. You don't have to continue looking for Nianji. If you want to avenge little Nianji, kill Gu Yanran and pay with your life." What did this mean? Hua Xiaoheng was stunned. What did He Jichu mean? Did he know that Gu Nianji was already? Hua Xiaoheng's entire body was cold. It was as if the Arctic air had suddenly invaded his office. He was almost frozen from the inside out. He stood in the middle of his office, his eyes fixed on his phone. He was as motionless as a clay sculpture. The veins on his forehead were bulging. He gripped his phone so tightly that he almost crushed it. Seeing this, Yin Shixiang quickly came over and tried to take the phone from him. He shouted, "Don't lose your temper at the phone. There's a lot of important information in it." At that moment he saw the text message from He Jichu. It flashed on Hua Xiaoheng's phone screen and disappeared. The phone screen turned black and entered locked mode again. Yin Shixiang's eyes widened, and his mouth opened so wide that an egg could be stuffed in. This. What does Professor He mean? Nianji. Nianji has already been killed. Could this have something to do with Gu Yanran? Yin Shixiang was in disbelief. He screamed, "No way. Gu Yanran was specially imprisoned by us. She's been locked up for almost a year. How could she have planned such an operation? If she's so powerful, why didn't she go to heaven? Why didn't she kidnap herself first, but deal with Nianji first? This is completely illogical." Yin Shixiang refused to believe this possibility. Zhao Liangzi looked up from behind the computer and asked blankly, "Big Xiong, what nonsense are you talking about so early in the morning? What happened to Nianji? She'll be fine. Xiaoyi is fine. Besides, what does this have to do with Gu Yanran?" Hua Xiaoheng couldn't figure it out either, and for some reason his heart was beating wildly. The sound of thumping echoed in his ears like a drum. What did He Jichu mean? After a long time, Hua Xiaoheng let out a sigh and slowly calmed down. He raised his head and said word by word, "I want to see her if she's alive, and I want to see her corpse if she's dead. Have our people in North America follow He Jichu immediately, and have the South American field agents guard near the He family's house in South America. See when he'll return." He wanted to run away after saying something that made no sense? Did he really think he didn't know where his hometown was? He wouldn't come back just because he said he wouldn't come back? Hua Xiaoheng's eyes were solemn. When He Jichu appeared 2 years ago, Hua Xiaoheng had sent people to investigate his background in South America. The underground godfather of South America was indeed very powerful, but no matter how powerful he was, he couldn't compete with the power of the entire Huaxia Empire. Like Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangzi, Hua Xiaoheng also refused to believe that Gu Nianji had been killed. However, He Jichu's mention of Gu Yanran in his text message alerted him. Could it be that there really was a loophole in their manpower? That Gu Yanran could wreak havoc in their territory? But just as Yin Shixiang had said, this was illogical. If Gu Yanran really had such great power, the first thing she would do would be to get herself out of prison. Otherwise, she would be in Huo Xiaoheng's hands. Even if she killed Gu Nianji, she wouldn't be able to escape death. This didn't make sense at all. However, since He Zhichu had said so, he must have had his reasons. Huo Xiaoheng had already made up his mind as he thought about it. He said, "As for Gu Yanran, check all the surveillance cameras in the place where Gu Yanran is being held again. Don't make any moves for the time being. Be tight on the outside but loose on the inside. Don't alert the enemy. See if anyone has contacted her." He wanted to wait and see who was so powerful that they dared to support Gu Yanran at this critical juncture. That place was the territory of the Special Operations Forces, and there were people more important and powerful than Gu Yanran imprisoned there. However, so far no one had been able to do anything in there. What was going on? This was the first update of the day, Chapter 1447, The Secret Buried by Time, 5. A reminder for everyone's monthly and recommendation tickets. At 8 p.m., the monthly ticket was 5,000 with an advance update. P.S. Originally the monthly ticket was still quite far away, but I think everyone will hate this broken chapter, so I'll add one more update at night. Mwah. Chapter 1459. Huo Xiaoheng swiped open his phone and read the text message from He Zhichu expressionlessly for a while. That short sentence took him half an hour to read. Little Zay, play the video of He Zhichu watching the surveillance footage here today. Huo Xiaoheng put away his phone and flicked his hand on the desk. Zhao Liangzi quickly connected the surveillance footage of the office today to the big screen on the wall. They had recorded He Zhichu's every move in Huo Xiaoheng's office today. Huo Xiaoheng looked at the big screen on the wall without batting an eyelid. When the surveillance footage showed the 4 black SUVs appearing, Huo Xiaoheng sat up straight. Replay the surveillance footage. Zhao Liangzi played the surveillance footage again. They saw He Zhichu standing in the middle of the office, his eyes also staring at the big screen on the wall. His expression didn't change much until the 4 black SUVs appeared. His eyes flashed quickly. This expression was too slight and brief. If Huo Xiaoheng hadn't had sharp eyes and slowed down the speed of the surveillance footage, it would have been difficult to notice. Huo Xiaoheng's fingers tapped lightly on the table. He thought to himself, there was indeed something wrong with these 4 cars, and there was also something wrong with He Zhichu's attitude. He frowned as if he was discussing it with Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangzi, but also as if he was talking to himself. Nianji should be fine. Something happened if it really happened. He Zhichu wouldn't have reacted like this. Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangzi quickly nodded in agreement. Yes. If something really happened to Nianji, Professor, he would tear down our building today. He must have deliberately misled us. He doesn't want us to follow him to save Nianji. The two of them agreed at once, but they were actually just putting on a brave front. They were also worried. What if there was a 1 in a million chance? Huo Xiaoheng frowned and said, from He Zhichu's reaction, he most likely knows clues about Nianji's kidnapping. Maybe he even knows who did it? Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangzi looked at each other and scratched their heads in unison. They felt that it was difficult to answer this question. Because the answer to this question would affect their future plans, and it would also directly affect Gu Nianji's life. Huo Xiaoheng was also very conflicted. Of course, he hoped that He Zhichu could really save Gu Nianji. Falling into He Zhichu's hands was better than falling into the hands of unknown criminals. However, he absolutely could not allow He Zhichu to control Gu Nianji, so he still had to continue investigating. Keep a close eye on He Zhichu's lead. Huo Xiaoheng stood up. Big Xiong, help me with the paperwork to go to the United States. He paused. Use another identity. This was another attempt to enter the United States under a fake identity. Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangzi objected in unison. Mr. Hua, you can't go. I'll go. They could not let their commander be in danger again. Huo Xiaoheng walked to the window and placed both hands on the windowsill. He looked out at the scorching summer sun and pursed his lips. It's fine. Help me with the paperwork. You two will come with me. They didn't expect that in the afternoon, when Yin Shixiang had just finished the paperwork for his trip to America, their field personnel at B University would send back an important message. Huo Xiao, Professor, he resigned from B University. He really won't be coming back. Yin Shixiang quickly relayed the field personnel's findings to Huo Xiaoheng and forwarded He Zhichu's resignation email to Huo Xiaoheng's mailbox. They had been hoping for a fluke before, but they didn't expect He Zhichu to even resign from his position as a professor of law at B University. He really didn't plan to return to the Huaxia Empire. Hua Xiaoheng said calmly, "Contact the field personnel in the United States and ask them to find out how He Zhichu's work in the United States is going." He Zhichu was a partner of the largest law firm in the United States and a tenured professor at Harvard Law School. These two jobs were the jobs He Zhichu had before he came to teach at B University in the Huaxia Empire. An hour later, the American field personnel sent two unfortunate pieces of news. Professor He resigned from Harvard Law School in the United States and sold his partner's shares in the largest law firm. All of Professor He's real estate in the United States has been transferred to a trust fund. Hua Xiaoheng clenched his fists tightly. When did this happen? It happened this morning. The American field personnel gave him a time. Hua Xiaoheng took out his phone and looked at it. It was the time He Zhichu had sent him a text message. In other words, as soon as He Zhichu returned to the United States in the morning, he sent several emails to resign from B University and Harvard Law School. He asked someone to sell his partner's shares and sign the trust fund transfer letter to transfer all of his real estate to the trust fund. No matter how he looked at it, this move didn't seem premeditated. Because according to the information obtained by the American field personnel, He Zhichu had almost sold his partner's shares at a low price in a hurry. Immediately after, the Special Operations Forces field personnel in South America who were in charge of keeping an eye on the He family also sent a special urgent message. A few hours ago, He Zhichu transferred all of the He family's assets in South America to a large family in Colombia. The He family's power was almost wiped out overnight. Bang! Hua Xiaoheng punched the desk and squeezed out a sentence from between his teeth. There's no need to go to the United States. Go straight to South America. He wanted to see what He Zhichu was up to. According to their investigation, the He family had risen to power in Colombia 7 years ago and controlled many political forces and gangs in South America. They were known as the underground godfather of South America. In a short 7 years, the He family suddenly rose to power. The presidents of South American countries took turns to take office, but they all had to respect the He family. But 7 years later, He Zhichu actually handed over all of his power without hesitation. What was he thinking? What was he trying to do? With these questions in mind, Hua Xiaoheng took his private plane from the imperial capital to the capital of Cuba, Havana. During the nearly 20-hour flight, he only slept on the plane. By the time he got off the plane, he had completely recovered. His expression was calm and composed. When he shook hands with the Cuban officials who came to greet him, he was still able to maintain his poise and chat with the Cuban diplomats who came to greet him. This time, Hua Xiaoheng came to Cuba in the name of an official visit. They had a good relationship with Cuba anyway, so there were many opportunities for military cooperation. Hua Xiaoheng was visiting as the Deputy Secretary General of the Supreme Military Council to inspect the military cooperation between the two countries, so it was reasonable. The CIA in the United States was also paying attention to Hua Xiaoheng's visit, but they didn't have many people in Cuba, so they couldn't keep an eye on him. Therefore, without them noticing, Hua Xiaoheng, Yin Shixiang, and Zhao Liangzi had already changed their clothes and left the capital of Cuba, Havana. They went directly to He Zhichu's hometown, the small town of Uyuni in the southwest of Bolivia, South America. Although the He family was famous in Colombia, their hometown was not in Colombia but in Bolivia. The small town of Uyuni in Bolivia was located in the plateau of the Andes, between 3,600 and 3,700 meters above sea level. This small town had a world-famous scenic spot, the salt marsh of Uyuni, also known as the Mirror of the Sky. Every year from December to March, the clear water of the Leipes River would flow into the white salt marsh outside the small town of Uyuni, forming a shallow glass-like lake. The entire shallow salt marsh lake covered an area of more than 9,000 square kilometers. When the sun shone, the surface of the shallow lake became a huge mirror. The blue sky, white clouds, and the morning light and sunset glow could all be clearly reflected in the shallow salt marsh lake. Because the area was wide, the surface was smooth and flat, and it was in a plateau area, the reflectivity of the surface was very high. The sky and clouds were reflected in the shallow salt marsh lake. When one was in it, the blue sky and white clouds were above their heads, and the lake and mountains were also under their feet. The lake and mountains were like a mirror, so the scenery here was called the Mirror of the Sky. Because the reflectivity of the surface here was extremely high, it was the most ideal place to test and calibrate Earth's remote sensing satellites. When Hua Xiaoheng and the others arrived, it was August. August was summer in the northern hemisphere, and winter in the southern hemisphere. It was also the dry season for the salt marsh of Uyuni. Therefore, when they drove into the small town of Uyuni and passed by the famous Mirror of the Sky, they only saw a vast expanse of salt marsh. There was no sign of the lake at all. The person who guided them was the team leader of the Special Operations Forces field personnel in South America. His surname was Chui and he was young. They all called him Little Chui. Little Chui drove the off-road vehicle and was carrying Hua Xiaoheng, Yin Shixiang, and Zhao Liangzi. He was very excited. Major General Hua, are you feeling unwell? This is a plateau. If you have altitude sickness, I have acetazolamide here. Can help you breathe. Sildenafil can relieve pulmonary edema. There's also dexamethasone, which can relieve cerebral edema. Do you want to take some? Yin Shixiang, who was sitting in the passenger seat, found it funny. He said, Major General Hua's body needs these things? Little Chui, you carry a lot of pills with you, don't you? Little Chui didn't mind at all. He smiled and said, I can't help it. I grew up in the southern plains. Altitude sickness is more serious, so I carry more medicine with me. Zhao Liangzi couldn't bear it and said, Since you're not used to this place, you should apply for a transfer back or somewhere else. Little Chui quickly shook his head and said, No need, no need. I'm a soldier. I'll go wherever I'm needed. As for these difficulties, it's a piece of cake. I can overcome them. Besides, I've been here for several years. No one is more familiar with the geographical environment and customs here than I am. This was today's second monthly vote of 5,000 advance updates, Chapter 1448, The Secret Buried by Time 6. A reminder for everyone's monthly votes and recommendation votes. Good night, dear ones. Chapter 1460. Hua Xiaoheng looked at the scenery of the Andes Mountains outside the car window and thought to himself, it seems that they have to add an environmental adaptation test to the selection process for field personnel. He had to get to the high mountains to know about altitude sickness. A healthy, strong man was sometimes more likely to have altitude sickness than a thin and weak woman. However, he didn't say anything. He was silent the entire way as he followed Little Chui into the town of Yuni. This place was very rich in natural resources. In addition to the salt mines contained in the world's largest natural salt marsh, there were also rich lithium mines under the salt mines. It was said that the lithium mines here accounted for more than half of the world's lithium mines. Little Chui introduced them with familiarity. Although this is a small country, they pay great attention to protecting their natural resources. You know about lithium mines, right? They are the main component of cell phone batteries. In recent years, lithium mines have suddenly become a hot commodity, but the president here doesn't want to be preemptively developed. But how can they resist the demands of the princes in the Middle East and the big countries in Europe and the United States? It was the He family who appeared out of nowhere and supported the local government from behind. That's why they were able to carry out small-scale lithium mines according to their own schedule. Therefore, the main industries here are still tourism and the salt industry. Hua Xiaoheng was slightly moved. He thought to himself that the He family had some foresight. The group of people sat in the off-road vehicle and stopped in front of a pure white hotel. This was the most famous white sand hotel in Yuni town. It was built entirely with white salt from the Yuni salt marsh outside the town. Before they came, Little Chui had booked a room for them here. They went in and chatted with the tanned Highland girl at the front desk of the hotel. Little Chui got the key card and led them upstairs to their rooms. After settling down, the four of them pretended to be tourists. They carried their backpacks, wore black sunglasses and khaki fishermen's hats, and walked out of the White Sand Hotel's main entrance. They had just arrived, so of course they had to pretend to be tourists and visit everywhere. Hua Xiaoheng and the others had been paying attention to this small town for a long time, but they only found out 2 years ago that this was He Zhichu's hometown. The residents of the small town were simple, warm, and very talkative. They still remembered the He family situation and praised them. They spoke a local dialect, but they also spoke Spanish. Little Chui had been stationed in South America all year round and spoke fluent Spanish, so he translated for them. Hua Xiaoheng actually spoke Spanish as well, but at this time he only pretended not to understand, just like a standard tourist from Asia. An Indian girl with a long braid was peddling her homemade salted fish in front of her house. Her big eyes sparkled as she said with a smile, "You're asking about the He family? They're very lucky." "Good luck?" "Yeah. The He family used to live on the east side of the town. There were only a few families there. They weren't in good health and often got sick. I heard from my grandmother that they moved here from another place." The old grandmother, who was wearing a flowery headscarf, sold them the small animal she had made and said, "The He family? I know them, but they've all passed away." As he said that, he pouted his lips in a certain direction. "They're all dead?" Xiao Chui asked in surprise. "No way, oh, they're not all dead." The old grandmother said nonchalantly, "There's a family. I think there's a family with the surname He. They moved away 13 years ago. Later, when the son of that family heard that he had made a fortune outside, he sent people back to renovate their family's cemetery. Wu Xiaoheng and the others looked at each other and asked for the exact time. The old grandmother couldn't remember clearly anymore. He could only continue to wander around the town and ask around. In order not to arouse the vigilance and attention of others, they didn't ask about the He family every day. Instead, he would follow other tourists around and accidentally meet a local and ask him a question. Over the next few days, they quietly visited the entire town. They chatted with the sheriff and the mayor, had dinner, and collected a lot of information about the He family. It was similar to the information they had collected before. At night, the four of them gathered in Hu Xiaoheng and Yin Shixiang's room to summarize their findings over the past few days. From the information from the police station here, the He family came here from abroad decades ago and settled down. There weren't many of them, only 3 families. Zhao Liangzi first told them about the information he had found on the police station's computer. But they all use Spanish names here. Other than the surname, it's difficult to match the first name. Yin Shixiang also said, "What's certain is that the He family who moved here were in a very ordinary financial situation. They weren't rich. The men in the He family all had genetic diseases, and most of them died before they were 30 years old. The last family with the surname He left here 13 years ago. It said that they went to Colombia." Little Chui added, "I think the family that moved away was He Zhichu and his father. According to the neighbors here, it was Mr. He who said he wanted to treat his son's illness. Unexpectedly, he died at a young age like the other He family members. Then the family left and never came back. It wasn't until 7 years ago that a convoy suddenly came and built a luxurious cemetery for the He family here. They also built an ancestral hall and hired locals to offer sacrifices on time every year. Only then did the people here know that the He family who moved away 13 years ago had made a fortune." Little Chui looked at Hu Xiaoheng. "Major General Hua, Professor He and the others left here 13 years ago. 7 years ago they made a fortune and returned home in glory. So it took them 6 years to become the underground godfathers of South America." Hu Xiaoheng frowned slightly and rested his chin on his hand. He said lightly, "The family that left here 13 years ago was said to be 3 people. Mr. He's son, and a nanny who raised him since he was young." He looked up at the window. "Where is He Zhichu's father? And where is his nanny?" Yin Shixiang was puzzled. "Are you so sure that the He family who moved away from here is Professor He's family? Other than them, who else is there?" Zhao Liangzi asked in return. "The other He family members all died of illness. Only the family that moved out survived, and they even came back to build the cemetery." "That's true. The people in the town say that the underground godfather of all of South America is from Yuni town." Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangzi argued with each other, but neither of them could convince the other. Wu Xiaoheng knocked them on the head and said, "Stop arguing. The investigation is almost done. We'll go to the cemetery tomorrow to take a look." Early the next morning, Little Chui took them to the cemetery in Yuni town. In the middle of the cemetery, there was a white salt path that divided the entire cemetery in 2. The left side of the path was the best place there. It was backed by a mountain and faced a lake. 7 or 8 snow-white tombstones stood quietly under the blue sky at the top of the mountains. The highland wind blew from afar, carrying with it the sound of the wind, like the whimpers of the dead. There were more and more tombstones on the right side, but they were uneven in size and crooked. They could not be compared to the 7 or 8 tombstones on the left side of the cemetery. An old woman wearing a gorgeous highland dress and a headscarf stood in front of a tombstone, covering her face and crying. Little Chui pointed at the cemetery on the left and said in a low voice, "This is the cemetery of the He family. 7 years ago, Professor He's family sent people back to their hometown to worship their ancestors and rebuilt the cemetery here." "No wonder the cemetery here is so new," Yin Shixiang whispered. He put his palms together and bowed in front of the grave. The tombstone in front of the old woman was newer, as if it had just been erected there. Because the people here did not understand Chinese, when Hu Xiaoheng and the others spoke in Chinese, they did not lower their voices. The old woman who was crying in front of the tombstone heard them. She paused and turned to look at them. Hu Xiaoheng's heart skipped a beat. They had walked almost the entire town over the past few days, but they had not seen this old woman. This old woman was obviously Chinese. Hu Xiaoheng deliberately greeted her in Chinese. "Hello, are you also a tourist?" The old woman wiped her hands on her skirt and shook her head. She said stiffly, "No." With that, she left the cemetery and headed for the town. Hua Xiaoheng looked at her back and gave little Chui a look. Little Chui understood and pretended to enjoy the scenery as he followed. Hua Xiaoheng, Yin Shixiang, and Zhao Liangzi wandered around the cemetery for a while. They took photos of every tombstone and planned to take them back to study. Little Chui followed them and returned not long after. He panted and said excitedly to Hua Xiaoheng, "Major General Hua, this old woman just returned to town yesterday. Guess who she is?" Hua Xiaoheng's mind raced and he blurted out, "He Zichu's nanny?" Little Chui. "Major General Hua, you're so amazing." He gave Hua Xiaoheng a thumbs up. Hua Xiaoheng's heart jumped with excitement. How did she come back? Where did she come from? Little Chui led them as he said, "I just asked the old woman's neighbors. They said that a luxury car sent her back yesterday, and a truck brought 2 coffins. They had just been buried. The other party was very respectful to her and let her stay in the He family's best house. There were also doctors and nurses who came to check on her." "Was it arranged by Professor He?" Yin Shixiang asked quietly. "No." Little Chui shook his head. "I asked. The person who sent her back was the big local family in Colombia, the big family that the He family transferred all their property and power to." Hua Xiaoheng stopped in his tracks and suddenly had a bad feeling. He had originally thought that he could wait here for the rabbit. In the end, He Zichu had never thought of returning to his hometown. He had even arranged for his nanny. It was obvious that he was really going to live in seclusion. The world was so big. Where were they going to find him? Hua Xiaoheng had a headache. "Major General Hua? Let's go." Hua Xiaoheng took a deep breath and went to find the old woman first. They arrived in front of the He family's mansion. It was also built 7 years ago. It was a typical Spanish-style building. The old woman in colorful clothes sat beside the fountain in the middle of the courtyard and stared blankly at the sculpture in the fountain. It was a naked little boy with wings on his back. Hua Xiaoheng gently knocked on the iron door that was half the height of a person. The old woman turned her head and saw them. Perhaps it was because they were all Chinese, she asked very gently, "What can I do for you?" Hua Xiaoheng took out a photo of He Zichu that he had taken in the past and said, "We're looking for this person." "Do you know him? Who are you looking for?" The old woman looked at him curiously. Her gaze moved to the photo in Hua Xiaoheng's hand and she suddenly froze. Tears suddenly welled up in her cloudy eyes as she took the photo from Hua Xiaoheng's hands. Trembling, she cried and laughed at the same time. "This is my young master, my little Achu. Why do you have his photo?" "We're his friends," Hua Xiaoheng said patiently. "But he suddenly disappeared, so we're looking for him." "Disappeared?" The old woman frowned. "What do you mean by disappeared?" "He suddenly said that he was going to leave and wouldn't come back. We couldn't contact him anymore. We were worried that something had happened to him, so we came to his hometown to take a look." As they spoke, a woman dressed as a nurse walked out of the mansion and said to the old woman, "Great aunt, are you tired? Do you want to go in and rest?" "Great aunt?" Hua Xiaoheng raised an eyebrow. "May I ask if you're He Zichu's great aunt? Why have we never heard of him having a great aunt? Didn't the people in town say that she was a nanny? How did she become a great aunt?" The old woman wiped her tears with her hand and waved at the nurse. "I'm not tired. You can go back first." The nurse nodded and politely greeted Hua Xiaoheng and the others before packing up the medicine box and leaving. After she left, the old woman stood up and said, "You're right. I'm not He Zichu's great aunt. I'm actually his nanny." Then why did those people say that I was his great aunt?" The old woman smiled bitterly. "Actually, I don't know how to say it." She caressed the photo of He Zichu that Hua Xiaoheng had given her and said, "Follow me." She seemed to have a lot on her mind that she wanted to tell someone. She brought Hua Xiaoheng and the others to the cemetery where they had just left. The old woman pointed to a relatively small tombstone and said, "I don't know who this He Zichu you're looking for is. I only know that my young master, my Achu, died 13 years ago. He died in my arms." "What?" Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangzi cried out in unison. A gust of wind blew from the top of the mountain, and the cemetery was cold. Everyone couldn't help but shiver. He Zichu, who had just argued in Hua Xiaoheng's office a few days ago, was now hearing from this old woman that he had died 13 years ago. Then who was the He Zichu who had appeared by Gun Yanji's side 2 years ago? "Are you sure you're not mistaken? We just saw him a few days ago." Hua Xiaoheng saw that the old woman was old and didn't really trust her memory. What if she had Alzheimer's? Yes, I showed you the video of him. It was taken a few days ago and he was even throwing a tantrum. As Zhao Liangzi spoke, he showed the old woman the surveillance footage of He Zichu that he had downloaded to his phone. The old woman only glanced at it before wrapping the shawl embroidered with a flamingo tightly around her body. She said dryly, "I know this person exists. I even went to look for him." Hu Xiaoheng remained calm. "Really? May I ask where you've been living all these years? Haven't you been with him?" "No." The old woman shook her head and said tiredly, "We left here to seek medical attention, but before we could find anyone, He passed away. Later the young master also passed away. I had no money, so I couldn't send them back for burial. I kept working outside, trying to save enough money to send their coffins back to the Wuxia Empire. Until last year I saw a person on TV who looked exactly like my young master. His name was also He Jichu. If her young master hadn't passed away at the age of 16, he would have definitely grown up to look like He Jichu." There was only one chapter today. It was 4,000 words long. Chapter 1449, The Secret Buried by Time, 7. P.S. This great aunt came out before. Do you still remember? Chapter 1461. Didn't you want to bring their coffins back to the Wuxia Empire? Why are you back here? Hu Xiaoheng looked down at the obviously new tombstone in front of him. The name engraved on it was in Spanish, so he couldn't tell who it was. The old woman took a handkerchief and wiped the tombstone in front of her reluctantly. She whispered, "That gentleman left. He asked someone to send me back." Hu Xiaoheng's heart skipped a beat. His eyes darkened as he looked at the new grave in front of him, as if he couldn't wait to see through it. Yin Shixiang whispered to Zhao Liangzi, "Professor, he must have predicted that we would definitely come to his hometown to wait for him, so he simply sent this person back, right? Is this how he told us his true background?" Zhao Liangzi took out his phone and sent a text message to Hu Xiaoheng. Hu Xiaoheng looked down at it and didn't comment. He tapped his finger on the tombstone twice and turned to look at the old woman. "Are you willing to return to the Wuxia Empire? If you are, I can bring you and their coffins back to the Wuxia Empire for burial." "Huh? Really? You're from the Wuxia Empire?" The old woman was surprised and delighted. She looked up at him eagerly. "I want to go back to the northeast. That's our real hometown, no problem." Hu Xiaoheng remembered Gu Nianji's grandfather, Gu Hao's suicide note, and his eyes darkened. He pointed at the tombstones in the cemetery and said, "They all came from the northeast?" "Yes, it's been many years. After the war ended, we lived here." The old woman sighed. "I heard that our country is very powerful now. The old Chinese who had left their homeland for decades were like duckweed. Their greatest wish was to return to their roots. No matter how much turmoil their homeland had experienced and how much mud they had walked through, it always had an unusual attraction to the Wuxia Empire. No matter how far they went, they wanted to come back in the end. Since Hu Xiaoheng had agreed to take them back, he naturally had the ability to do so. The old woman didn't refuse, nor did she think about whether Hu Xiaoheng was a liar. After all, she was almost 70 years old and had nothing. She only guarded this cemetery. What could she have to be cheated of? She only wanted to return to the Wuxia Empire. If Hu Xiaoheng could fulfill her last wish, so what if she was cheated by him? The old woman didn't know Hu Xiaoheng's identity and status at all. She only felt that he was a very capable and reliable person. Under Hu Xiaoheng's instructions, all the remains of the He family in the cemetery were quickly extracted from the ground, placed in small coffins, and transported to the airport at the foot of the mountain. The old woman pointed at the two new coffins she had just brought back and said, "This is Mr. He and this is the young master." The corners of Hu Xiaoheng's eyes twitched. "Oh, who is young master?" "Maiachu He Jichu," the old woman said stubbornly as she slowly stroked the new cherrywood coffin with her hand. Yin Shixiang, Zhao Liangzi, and little Cui looked at each other. None of them believed the old woman's words. Although the coffin was new, the two skeletons inside were already skeletons. They had been dead for at least 10 years. This person was He Jichu? Hu Xiaoheng pursed his lips and directed them to board the plane. This time, he had mobilized a transport plane to transport the remains of the He family cemetery. Little Cui ran back and forth to help. In the end, when he saw the plane fly into the clouds, his eyes were still red, and he waved his hands in the airport for a long time. Sitting in his private plane, Hu Xiaoheng crossed his arms and closed his eyes to rest. Zhao Liangzi and Yin Shixiang sat opposite him. The old woman insisted on staying with the He family's remains. They couldn't dissuade her, so they let her sit on the transport plane. Therefore, only Hu Xiaoheng, Yin Shixiang, and Zhao Liangzi were in the private plane. Zhao Liangzi looked at the old woman's oral notes that he had recorded and whispered to Yin Shixiang, "According to this nanny, He Jichu left this place at the age of 16. How did he finish college, law school, and become a full-time professor at Harvard Law School in 7 years. In Shixiang, only Nianji can achieve this speed, right? The underachiever said sourly, expressing that he didn't understand the world of the top students. Zhao Yangzi shook his head. It's not just a matter of education. Professor He's demeanor and habits really don't look like a teenager who has lived in a small town in South America for 16 years. The two planes flew for another 30 hours and finally returned to Terminal T3 of the Wuxia Imperial Capital International Airport from Bolivia in South America. In 2 days and 1 night they had returned from winter to summer. The old woman got off the plane and looked at the ultra-modern new airport. Countless large planes were lined up neatly on the tarmac. In the distance, the lanterns were lit, and the lights were like practice, decorating the entire city with brilliant colors. Compared to the devastated country they had left decades ago, this scene was like a lifetime ago. The old woman covered her mouth with her hand and sobbed, "I'm back. I brought you back." With that, her body tilted and she fell to the ground. "Call an ambulance." Hua Xiaoheng walked over quickly. In Shixiang had already squatted down to check the old woman's breathing. He then opened her eyes and face to take a look. His heart suddenly felt suffocated. "Major General Hua, she's already gone." Hua Xiaoheng looked at the old woman and silently took off his military cap. He observed a 5-minute silence, then ordered her body to be frozen and sent back to the northeast for burial. He returned to the Special Operations Forces with 7 or 8 small coffins. Hua Xiaoheng handed them to Chen Lai, as well as a few strands of hair found in He Zhichu's suite in the B University Professor's building. "Test the DNA." These people had been dead for a long time, but the DNA in the bone grafts and teeth could be extracted. Chen Lai was experienced and knowledgeable. He did not ask further about Hua Xiaoheng's request. He immediately went into the laboratory to extract the DNA and prepare for sequencing. 8 hours later, his sequencing was completed. The results shocked him. "Major General Hua, come quickly." Chen Lai hurriedly called Hua Xiaoheng. Hua Xiaoheng rushed over immediately. He asked In Shixiang and Zhao Yangzi to stand guard at the door while he talked to him in Chen Lai's office. "What's the result?" Hua Xiaoheng asked in a deep voice. Chen Lai showed him the DNA sequencing results and rubbed his hands. "These people are all relatives. There's no doubt about that. The 2 skeletons you asked me to focus on." He pointed at the 2 small coffins that the old woman had brought back to Uni Town. "Their father and son." Hua Xiaoheng nodded with a calm expression. "What else?" "Yijichu's hair I gave you. This is the most amazing discovery." Chen Lai knocked on the writing board in the office with the pointer he used to teach. He said excitedly, "Yijichu's DNA is exactly the same as this 16-year-old boy's." Hua Xiaoheng suddenly looked up. "Really? Exactly the same? How similar are they?" "Just like identical twins." Chen Lai laughed. "They're even more similar than identical twins. It's like 2 backup files. One is a copy of the other." Identical twins might have different DNA nodes, but there was no difference between He Zhichu and the boy who died at the age of 16. It could be said that if the 16-year-old He Zhichu grew up, he would look like the Professor He they were familiar with. However, this Professor He and the boy who died at the age of 16 were clearly 2 different people. Hua Xiaoheng put his hands behind his back and frowned slightly. He muttered in Chen Lai's office. He Zhichu's nanny said that Mr. He only had 1 son and no twins. "That's strange." Chen Lai spread his hands. "It can't be human cloning because no country has such technology. To be honest, whoever has such technology can go to heaven. A few years ago, a certain country cloned a sheep. It was a short-lived sheep with all kinds of genetic defects. The human cloning process is even more complicated. Under current conditions, it's completely impossible to clone a healthy, normal and intelligent person like Professor He. In a sense, genetic technology was more difficult to develop than advanced weapons. Even geniuses can't do it?" Hua Xiaoheng thought of Gu Xiangwen. He remembered this amazing person's resume. Nianji's father started his MD plus PhD at the age of 16. Others would take 8 years to complete, but he finished it in 3. After that, he worked as a resident doctor for 2 years and became interested in physics. At the age of 20, he applied for a PhD in physics from MIT, which was ranked number 1. He graduated in only 3 years. After his PhD in physics, he went to pursue a PhD in biology. Hua Xiaoheng looked up at Chen Lai. "Look, Gu Xiangwen's last degree was a PhD in biology. Could it be related to genetic technology?" Chen Lai thought for a moment and shook his head. "That's unlikely. I've also studied the academic papers that Gu Xiangwen published. In terms of biology, his research isn't in the direction of cloning, so I don't think he can clone a healthy and normal person. Besides, if he could, he wouldn't be helpless about his daughter's illness. Chin Lai pointed out another piece of evidence. Do you still remember his last words? His greatest regret before he died was that he didn't cure his daughter's genetic disease. That was another suspicious point. He Jichu's line of communication was completely cut off, and there was still no news of Gu Nianji. Gu Xiangwen's heaven-defying technology didn't include the genetic level, so where was his breakthrough point? Wu Xiaoheng walked around the room a few times. The text message He Jichu sent him before he disappeared kept echoing in his mind. Avenge little Nianji. Kill Gu Yanran. One life for one life. Gradually, the suspicion in his heart pointed to one person. He turned around and said, seal all your sequencing results and list them as top-secret materials. I'll go find the truth. Wu Xiaoheng brought Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangzi to the place where Gu Yanran was being held. This was the territory of the Special Operations Forces, and the security here was even stronger than that of a local prison. They walked in the deep corridor. The building here was like a fortress and there were no windows at all. Normally there was still time to relax in a prison, but being locked up here, one could only see the ceiling of the cell. The prisoners locked up here couldn't go online or make phone calls. At most, they could only watch newspapers and television. If Gu Yanran was the one who led Gu Nianji's disappearance and kidnapping, how could she send the news to the outside world? It was obviously impossible. He Jichu must have meant something else when he said, if you want to avenge little Nianji, kill Gu Yanran. One life for one life. Wu Xiaoheng fell into deep thought again. Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangzi were extremely nervous. The results of the He family's DNA sequencing were too unbelievable. Both of them hadn't recovered yet. If it wasn't a clone, then what was it? Wu Xiaoheng was also wondering if he was searching in the wrong direction. Didn't those people kidnap Gu Nianji because of her special constitution? But what did the text message he received on Director Chen's phone mean? Could it be that the person who sent the text message to Director Chen wasn't in cahoots with the people who kidnapped Gu Nianji? After seeing Gu Yanran, their chaotic emotions gradually calmed down. Wu Xiaoheng's expression was calm as he strode in. Gu Yanran was the only one sitting in the small square room. The last time, it was also here that Wu Xiaoheng had brought Gu Nianji here to meet Gu Yanran. It had only been less than a month. Gu Yanran was still wearing the gray prison uniform, and she looked even more haggard than the last time. She was originally elegant and graceful, but now all of that had disappeared. She was so thin that she was only bones. Her face was devoid of flesh, making her cheekbones look especially high. Her lips were especially thin, and her face looked even more mean. Huh. Wu Xiao, it's only been less than a month. Why are you here again? Where's Nianji? Didn't she come with you? Gu Yanran glanced behind Wu Xiaoheng. Wu Xiaoheng walked in front of her and stood still with his hands behind his back. His face was expressionless. Gu Yanran, I'll ask you one last time. What else are you hiding from us? This time, I don't have the patience to wait for you to continue thinking. If you still don't tell me, I won't be polite. Gu Yanran sat on the chair and narrowed her eyes at Wu Xiaoheng. What else is there to hide? What do you mean? Wu Xiaoheng took 2 steps forward and pulled out his gun. He pressed it against Gu Yanran's chin and raised her head. He said calmly, that's what I mean. What did you do to Nianji? Hurry up and confess. Otherwise, I have plenty of ways to make your life a living hell. His tone was flat, but his tone made people shudder. He hadn't tortured her in the past because torture was useless in the case of Gu Xiangwen. None of them had seen Gu Xiangwen before. Even if she made up a story, they wouldn't be able to verify the truth. But Gu Nianji was different. All of them were familiar with Gu Nianji. If Gu Yanran made up a story, they would immediately be able to tell the truth and make her reincarnate. Although Gu Yanran tried her best to hold it in, she still shivered at Wu Xiaoheng's tone. The fear in her eyes was difficult to suppress. What did you say? I don't understand. You really don't understand? Wu Xiaoheng pressed the gun against Gu Yanran's chin even tighter. His eyes were deep, and his straight nose left a clear shadow on his face. Tell me, what did you do to Nianji? Gu Yanran frowned slightly. What can I do to her? I'm locked up here. I can't even make a phone call or go online. What can I do to her? Suddenly, she seemed to have thought of something. Her eyes lit up and her entire body lit up. Holding Wu Xiaoheng's wrist, Gu Yanran asked anxiously, did something happen to Gu Nianji? Did something happen to that fake? Fake? Wu Xiaoheng's sharp eyes swept over. You're saying Nianji is a fake? You're really crazy. Did you forget the lawsuit in court? Do you still think you're the daughter of the Gu family? There was only one chapter today. 4,100 words. Chapter 1450. The Secret Buried by Time, 8. P.S. Thank you to Helen 3500 Meatball for the 10,000 Chidian coins yesterday. Moi. Chapter 1462. Gu Yinran completely ignored Hua Xiaoheng's sarcasm. She only grabbed his wrist and asked stubbornly, "Did something happen to that fake?" Her eyes were shining as if all her wishes in this life had been fulfilled. It was as if she really knew something that no one else knew. Although he was unwilling, Hua Xiaoheng still hid the surprise in his heart. He pulled his wrist out of Gu Yinran's hand and took a step back without batting an eyelid. "If you know where she is, I'll consider letting you go." Hua Xiaoheng had never said something like that in his career. In order to find Gu Nianji's whereabouts, he was even willing to give Gu Yinran a big cake. Gu Yinran understood Hua Xiaoheng's words and froze for a moment before leaning back in her seat. Looking up at the ceiling, her eyes were shining as tears quietly welled up. After a while she confirmed again, "What happened to Gu Nianji? Tell me honestly and I'll tell you everything I know." Hua Xiaoheng raised his eyebrows and put his hands in his trouser pockets. He said calmly, "Nianji is missing. We have no clues." His tone was too calm, as if Gu Nianji's disappearance was not a big deal. "Huh? Only missing?" His tone also affected Gu Yinran's feelings, and her shining eyes instantly dimmed. Gu Yinran was extremely disappointed. She slowly stood up and said coldly, "I said before, I'm only keeping one breath to see the end of this B***tish fake. Since her end hasn't arrived yet, I have no comment." She then turned to leave. However, Hua Xiaoheng suddenly reached out and grabbed her neck from behind. "You want to leave? Do you think I have that much patience?" At this point, Hua Xiaoheng's patience with Gu Yinran was completely exhausted. In the beginning he kept her alive to investigate Gu Xiangwen's whereabouts. Now that Gu Xiangwen had been found, Gu Nianji had already asked all the questions she wanted to ask. She was already worthless and could have died a long time ago. However, after their last interrogation, both Gu Nianji and Hua Xiaoheng had been busy with work, so they didn't have time to deal with Gu Yinran. Now that Gu Nianji was also missing, Hua Xiaoheng really didn't want to tolerate this person anymore. Hua Xiaoheng tightened his grip and Gu Yinran couldn't speak. Waving her hands behind her, she tried to grab the back of Hua Xiaoheng's hand to make him let go. However, Hua Xiaoheng had already steeled his heart. He roared, "Take her away." Gu Yinran was quickly blindfolded and taken out of the place where she was being held. She didn't know how long she had been walking. She only remembered getting on the car, getting off the car, getting on the boat, getting off the boat, feeling the turbulence of the water, and smelling the faint salty smell of fish in the wind. Based on her intuition, she guessed that she had reached the sea. She followed them all the way until they finally entered a room, where her blindfold was taken off. The place was clean and tidy, surrounded by pure white walls that were as bright as a big screen. Gu Yinran was secured to a high-tech chair, and her hands and feet were shackled. A person in a white shirt and mask walked in and connected the electrodes on the chair to Gu Yinran's brain, face and spine. Hua Xiaoheng stood behind the man and said expressionlessly, "This is the last time. Are you going to tell me or not?" "So what if I tell you?" "So what if I don't tell you?" "I'll say it again. Do you want to hear me make up a story?" Gu Yinran giggled and even winked at Hua Xiaoheng. She knew that Hua Xiaoheng was a regular soldier of the Huaxia Empire. He had a high position and a good character. He would never do anything to her. She could even survive the lie detector, so what was this? Did he think she was scared? A hint of disdain flashed across Gu Yinran's eyes. Hua Xiaoheng didn't miss the flash of contempt in her eyes. "You think I won't do anything to you?" Hua Xiaoheng rubbed his wrist and said calmly, "Do you know where this place is?" Gu Yinran looked around and smiled charmingly. "It's your place anyway. What does it matter if I know or not?" "You're wrong. This isn't our place." Hua Xiaoheng turned around and put his hands behind his back. His figure was straight and just looking at his back was pleasing to the eye. This is a small island on the high seas. It was also a secret base of the Special Operations Forces. Some things that weren't suitable to be done within the country's borders would be done here. Gu Yinran was like a dead pig that wasn't afraid of boiling water. She knew that she couldn't escape death, but she didn't care at all. She was fantasizing about Hua Xiaoheng's back in her mind and didn't listen to Hua Xiaoheng's words at all. Hua Xiaoheng suddenly turned around and Gu Yinran was shocked. She averted her slightly covetous gaze. Holding back the disgust in his heart, Hua Xiaoheng said calmly, "Do you know how many kinds of pain there are? How many levels?" Gu Yanran shook her head blankly. She didn't understand why Hua Xiaoheng would ask this. It said that the pain of giving birth is the most unbearable of all pain. Hua Xiaoheng quietly walked to a place near the door. Actually, that's not right. Everyone has different tolerance for different kinds of pain, so the pain they feel is also different. He turned off the ceiling light in the pure white room. Now let's see which kind of pain is the most unbearable for you. Gu Yanran finally understood and looked at Hua Xiaoheng in disbelief. You want to torture me? Don't forget you're a Huaxia soldier. How can you torture me? Your organization won't let you off. Major General Hua looked down and said calmly, First of all, I'm a Huaxia soldier. I won't do this to my own countrymen. But you, Gu Yanran, are not a Huaxia citizen, and you're not a descendant of Huaxia. Why should I obey the law to you? Second, this is international waters. Huaxia laws can't control this place. Gu Yanran's expression gradually darkened. She snorted. What are you trying to do? It's just torture. Why did you turn off the lights? Could it be that you are plotting against me? She smiled again. Major General Hua, you don't have to force yourself on me. I'll definitely lie down obediently and not resist. I'll make you feel like hell? She thought Hua Xiaoheng was going to force himself on her. Most female prisoners wouldn't be able to escape this fate if they fell into the hands of the enemy. Hua Xiaoheng was still calm and steady. He didn't answer her at all and said, Let me introduce you to the pain you'll have to endure later. The man dressed in white and wearing a mask came over again. He used 2 small instruments to prop up her eyelids and stuffed her mouth with them. This way she wouldn't be able to close her eyes or bite her tongue. Hua Xiaoheng raised his hand. The 4 walls of the room, the ceiling above her head, and the floor immediately began to play video clips. Hua Xiaoheng's voice sounded like the voiceover of the video. Skinning, chopping at the waist, splitting the car, 5 punishments, death by 1,000 cuts, beheading, cooking. These are known as the top 10 tortures of ancient times. Enjoy it well. Later try it yourself. Thrilling scenes, accompanied by horrifying music and screams, were projected from the big screens on the walls, ceilings and floors. Gu Yanran only took one look and was so scared that her entire body trembled, and her face turned pale. She didn't want to see it, but her eyes were propped up and couldn't close them at all. She turned her head, but the walls around her were all showing the same scenes. She looked up and down. The ceiling above her head and the floor beneath her feet were all playing the same scenes. The shock of torture was everywhere. This kind of psychological attack was sometimes even more effective than direct torture. Gu Yanran finally burst into tears. She cursed with her mouth stuffed. Hua Xiaoheng, you're so despicable. Do you think you can make me speak like this? Dream on. If you have the ability, then really dismember me. She cried for a while and thought it through. As expected, Hua Xiaoheng didn't dare to really torture her. He only dared to use these fake scenes to scare her. Her crying gradually stopped and she stared at Hua Xiaoheng. Hua Xiaoheng stood quietly at the door and waited for the scenes of torture to end before saying, The original intention of these tortures is to make people feel unbearable pain. With the current technology, there's no need for such primitive methods to make you feel such pain. Hua Xiaoheng raised a hand again. Since you're so stubborn, there's nothing I can do. Let's start with the first one, the pain of skinning. Gu Yanran looked at Hua Xiaoheng in confusion. She didn't know what he meant. But she soon understood. The electronic seat began to work. The electrode needles connected to her body went deep into her body and directly connected to her nerves. The electrode needles simulated the intensity of the torture of skinning and directly acted on Gu Yanran's nerves. Although she wasn't skinned and deboned, the pain of being skinned and deboned flashed through her entire body in an instant. Gu Yanran's entire body stiffened, and her eyeballs were about to pop out. She felt her entire body burning as if her skin had really been peeled off. She could see the blood-red flesh, the pulsing blood vessels and the snow-white bones. Gu Yanran let out an earth-shattering scream. Her entire body seemed like it had been fished out of the water, and even her outer clothes were drenched in cold sweat. Hua Xiaoheng remained calm. Continue, there are 9 more. Try them one by one. After you've tasted them, if you still don't speak, do it again. The intensity will gradually increase and see how many you can endure. This kind of high-tech simulated torture intensity directly acted on the human's pain nerves, magnifying all kinds of pain several times. Hua Xiaoheng's torture didn't show any wounds, so of course, it wouldn't make the other party lose a piece of flesh or bleed a drop of blood. There wouldn't even be any signs of it after the examination, but the effect was better than ancient torture. He walked out of the torture room and lit a cigarette. Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangzi stood at the door and were making a bet. I'll bet more than 5 minutes but less than 10. The most powerful terrorist here back then lasted 10 minutes. She's pretty good at enduring. Before Yin Shixiang could finish speaking, Gu Yanran's hoarse voice came from the intercom at the door. I'll speak. I'll speak. Kill me after I finish. I can't take it anymore. Her speech was muffled, but everyone heard what she said clearly. Zhao Yangzi looked down at the timer. 15 seconds. Pay up. Zhao Yangzi bet within a minute. Huo Xiaoheng glanced at the two of them and turned to walk in. He pressed the pause button on the remote control in his hand and put his hands in his trouser pockets. He was calm and composed. Okay, speak. If you lie, we'll continue. Gu Yanran looked up, panting. Her face was as white as a ghost. Which Gu Nianji are you asking about? Huo Xiaoheng's heart sank and the corners of his eyes twitched involuntarily. Which Gu Nianji? What do you mean? Gu Yanran's eyes flickered. Huo Xiaoheng immediately pressed the remote control in his hand. Another kind of more unbearable pain spread along the electrode needle in Gu Yanran's waist. This was the pain of being cut in half. Gu Yanran was defeated by the pain again, and her psychological defenses completely collapsed. I'll speak. I'll speak. I'll speak. I beg you, take this away. Huo Xiaoheng's finger landed on the pause button, but he didn't press it. He was as calm as a scientific explanation. His voice was slow. You speak, I'll listen. To tell the truth, I'll pause it. Continue to make up stories, and you'll continue to enjoy all kinds of pain until you find the most unbearable pain for you. Through her blurry tears, Gu Yanran looked at Huo Xiaoheng's face, which was even more handsome than before. She vaguely wondered if the devil's face was also like this. He looked incomparably handsome and suffocating, but the things he did were incomparably cruel. The pain in her body had reached an unbearable level. It was as if a rough hacksaw was sawing her nerves. The pain was extreme, and she finally understood what it meant to live a life worse than death. She only wanted to die quickly. She said intermittently, "The Caribbean, the blue hole." After saying a few more words, she tilted her head and fainted. The human body's self-protection mechanism against pain was activated. The electric chair had already delayed the time she fainted. Otherwise, she would have fainted the moment the pain of being skinned appeared. Huo Xiaoheng understood Gu Yanran's words, and his face instantly turned ashen. He pressed the pause button, turned around, and walked out of the torture chamber. Prepare the plane. We're going to the Caribbean blue hole. Not long after flying back from South America, Huo Xiaoheng's private plane took off again. This time they didn't use Cuba. Instead, they directly contacted Barbados, which was near the Caribbean, and flew straight to the country's airport. To be on the safe side, Huo Xiaoheng brought Yin Shixiang and Zhao Yangzi, as well as Chen Lai and Song Jining. Song Jining didn't know until she got on Huo Xiaoheng's private plane that Gu Nianji had been kidnapped and had been missing for almost 2 weeks. The most precious time to rescue her had long passed. Song Jining was extremely anxious. She complained to Huo Xiaoheng repeatedly, "What's wrong with you? You can't even keep an eye on the person you love the most. Nianji likes you for nothing." Yin Shixiang and Zhao Yangzi were dumbfounded when they heard this. This was really her biological mother. Nianji's biological mother. Huo Xiao must have given it to her for topping up her phone. The two of them quietly looked at Huo Xiaoheng's expression with sympathy. Huo Xiaoheng didn't say anything. Perhaps he was used to Song Jining's way of speaking, or perhaps he was blaming himself like this in his heart. However, his face didn't show anything. He was still calm and composed. With one hand on the armrest of the seat, he kept swiping his phone with the other. This was today's chapter of 4,100 words, chapter 1451, The Secret Buried by Time, 9. P.S. Thank you to Helen 3500 Meatball for the 10,000 Chidian coins yesterday. Mwah. Chapter 1463. Gu Yanran was also brought here. Chen Lai had given her a sedative, and she was sleeping in the back of the plane. Huo Xiaoheng ignored Song Jining's complaints. He was still thinking about what Gu Yanran said before she fainted. The purpose of their trip this time was to verify her statement. Huo Xiaoheng actually didn't like to use torture when interrogating suspects. In ancient times there was a saying, "There's nothing you can't ask for." That was to say, no matter what kind of testimony you wanted, the other party would say it under torture. However, Huo Xiaoheng and the others were in this line of work. They wanted the truth, not testimony that suited their own preferences. Therefore, during the process of searching for Gu Xiangwen, they had tested Gu Yanran's nerves and gone through many exhausting interrogations, but they had never tortured her. The main reason was that they knew nothing about Gu Xiangwen, so they couldn't verify whether Gu Yanran was telling the truth or not. A confession that couldn't be proven with circumstantial evidence wasn't reliable. That was because apart from a confession, it also had to be logical and compatible with physical evidence to be considered a complete chain of evidence. As for Gu Xiangwen's whereabouts, no matter what Gu Yanran said at the time, they couldn't verify her confession. Therefore, Hua Xiaoheng and the others didn't do anything unnecessary. But this time was different. Putting aside the fact that Gu Nianji was someone they were very familiar with, Hua Xiaoheng already had He Zhichu's text as a foundation. Deep down, he was already inclined to believe that Gu Yanran at least had some clues about Gu Nianji's kidnapping. Therefore, when Gu Yanran finally said something when she couldn't resist the torture, Hua Xiaoheng almost subconsciously believed her. Because not only did she have a confession, but she also provided the most important physical evidence. Now they were going to the place she said to find this physical evidence. Hua Xiaoheng turned to look out the window. In the layers of clouds, the sun was like a sugar egg close by. If Nianji was here, she would definitely pull his arm and ask him to make sugar eggs for her. Hua Xiaoheng's eyes dimmed. He pulled down the window cover and stopped looking at the scenery outside. The plane flew through the clouds. After more than 10 hours, they arrived above the Caribbean Sea. The small country of Barbados was not far ahead. At this time, the plane was flying over the Caribbean Sea. The round blue hole on the surface of the sea was a deeper and richer blue than the seawater elsewhere. Song Jining looked out of the plane window and was full of praise for the scenery here. She said, "Did Gu Xiangwen really install an electric fence in the blue hole's waters?" Hua Xiaoheng pulled open the window partition and peeked his head out to take a look. Okay. However, the purplish-blue lightning that had almost buried them at the bottom of the sea had disappeared. He remembered that Gu Nianji had damaged the solar battery of the electric fence here last time. After such a long time, the remaining power supply for the electric fence should have run out. Now the blue hole was just a blue hole. There were no longer those frightening purplish-blue electric arcs. TSK, that's amazing. Song Jining regretted that she did not see the shocking scene of the blue hole with her own eyes. A so-called genius is someone who can think of things that no one has thought of and do things that no one has ever done. The plane landed at the airport in the capital of Barbados. The Special Operations Forces field personnel in the Caribbean Sea area came to welcome Hua Xiaoheng and the others off the plane. When Hua Xiaoheng and the others came here, they were on a private vacation and did not announce their official identities. A small country like Barbados was an undefended country. The governor and high-ranking government officials had all gone on vacation at this time, and the people relied on themselves to maintain the operations of the country. The Special Operations Forces private plane was different from the private planes of other departments. It did not have those blinding national symbols. Of course, the more ordinary their private plane was, the better. It would definitely not attract attention. In fact, there were many wealthy people from all over the world who came to Barbados for vacation, so the air traffic controllers at the airport did not take Hua Xiaoheng's private plane seriously. They treated it as a private plane. After getting off the plane, Hua Xiaoheng asked the field personnel who had been waiting there for a long time, "Have you prepared everything we need?" "Everything is ready," the man quickly said. 5 diving suits, a medium-sized salvage ship, and an undersea drone. He had only prepared the things according to Hua Xiaoheng's instructions and did not ask what he was going to do. This time, Hua Xiaoheng had brought a few Special Operations Forces members who were especially good at diving with him in addition to Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangzi. Everyone got off the plane and went to the detached villa that the field personnel had prepared for them to rest. In the evening, their group boarded the medium-sized salvage ship that looked like a cruise ship and arrived near the blue hole. It was quiet here. There were no other tourists, only their group. The afterglow of the setting sun was still rippling on the surface of the sea, and half of the river was rustling and half of the river was red. The gray-backed seagulls spread their wings and glided at low altitudes, and the white seabirds walked back and forth on the reef with their tails up. The blue hole's waters were as beautiful as a dark blue dream, quietly appearing in front of them. When they got closer, the blue hole's waters were filled with reefs. The salvage ship could not enter at all and could only stop at the periphery. Fortunately, the mechanical arm could stretch freely at the bottom of the sea, so it was not afraid of these reefs. After the sky was completely dark, Hua Xiaoheng carried Gu Yanran to the deck and said, "Are you familiar with this place?" Gu Yanran opened her eyes and was at a loss for a while. Ever since she had fainted in the torture chamber on the high seas, she had been sedated and had been unconscious. However, when she opened her eyes again, she realized that she was already at sea. The sea in front of her was vast and the night was dark. She could only tell where she was from the sporadic starlight above her head. Her heart sank and she looked up at the night sky. She thought that today might be the last time she would see the starry sky of this sea. Although she had been mentally prepared ever since her identity had been exposed and she knew that she would not be able to escape death, she was still quite afraid when death really came. Hua Xiaoheng put his hands behind his back and looked at the blue hole in front of him calmly. He said calmly, "You'd better pray that you're telling the truth. Otherwise," Gu Yanran's eyes immediately revealed a look of fear. She looked at Hua Xiaoheng timidly, no longer having the arrogance she had before. She never thought that Hua Xiaoheng would not only be bold but also ruthless. He would actually torture her for that fake. Her hands and feet were still shackled, and she was also wearing an electronic collar around her neck. As long as she made the slightest movement, the electronic collar would make her wish that she was dead but unable to die. At this point, the only comfort in her heart was that the fake would not end up well. Gu Yanran blinked. Gu Yanran blinked. Based on the light on the island in front of her, she was able to confirm the location. Or rather, from the moment she revealed the secret in her heart, she knew that she would be brought here to take out the evidence. Gu Yanran smiled bitterly. "Do you know why I let that fake take over the Gu family's property, leaving me with nothing and almost going to jail? Do you know why I didn't dare to say it?" Hua Xiaoheng's face was dark. "If you have something to say, just say it. I don't have time to beat around the bush with you. Because I know that if I don't say it, I'll only lose the Gu family's property. But if I say it, I'll lose my life. If I lose my life, what do I need money for? Don't you think so? Hua Xiao." Gu Yanran looked at Hua Xiaoheng with a helpless expression. "If that fake didn't pretend to be Gu Xiangwen's daughter, you wouldn't even look at her, would you?" Hua Xiaoheng pursed his lips. "She's Gu Xiangwen's daughter. The DNA has already been verified." "Impossible," Gu Yanran said firmly again. "I don't know how she lied to you, but she definitely lied to you. If you don't believe me, you can go to the bottom of the blue hole and find out." Hua Xiaoheng glanced at her. "The bottom of the blue hole? Do you know how deep this hole is?" "I don't know," Gu Yanran answered calmly. "But if you want to know the truth, you have to go down. Bring her down." Hua Xiaoheng waved without looking back. A few people came up and blindfolded Gu Yanran. They sealed her mouth and immediately dragged her down. Hua Xiaoheng stood alone on the deck for a while. He recalled how Gu Nianji had risked her life to save him and little Zhe the last time they were in this sea. At that time, the most important thing in his heart was still his duty, his troops and his comrades. At that time, it wasn't that he didn't love her, but it wasn't as much as she loved him. This realization stabbed into Hua Xiaoheng's heart like a needle. He pursed his lips, turned around and changed into his diving suit. He took a few good divers and dove into the blue hole. It wasn't the first time Hua Xiaoheng had come to the bottom of the blue hole. The surrounding seawater was quiet, and there were slight ripples above his head. The sky was beautiful. There was no moon in the Caribbean Sea that night. There were only a few stars that dotted the dark blue sky. The few of them slowly sank with their scuba gear on their backs. This place was even more desolate than the last time he was here. It was already more difficult for creatures to grow in the blue hole. Moreover, the blue hole had been baptized by high-voltage electric fences, so it had a more lifeless and stagnant feeling than other places. There wasn't even a single seaweed, let alone any animals that were commonly seen at the bottom of the sea. There were only grayish-black reefs standing there. It was as if time had stopped here. There was no past or future. Hua Xiaoheng and his men stepped on the water and continued to dive until they reached their maximum diving depth and couldn't go any further. However, from here the bottom of the blue hole was still bottomless. It was dark, like a black hole that could devour everything including light. They couldn't see anything below at all. They looked up again. This distance was already deeper than the last time they came here. Last time he and little Zhe were busy trying to survive here. Moreover, there were electric fences above and around them, so they couldn't see anything else. Hua Xiaoheng and his men swam for a distance and confirmed that they couldn't see anything at all. "Go up." He gestured and brought them to the surface. "Major General Hua, what's down there?" Yin Shixiang pulled them up and asked curiously. Hua Xiaoheng didn't answer. One of the people who went down with him spat out a mouthful of seawater and said, "Nothing." "Major General Hua, are you sure what you're looking for is here?" Hua Xiaoheng took off the scuba gear and said, "It might be too deep. Let's put the underwater drone down first." This time, Zhao Liangzi could control the underwater drone by himself. They put the ginger underwater drone into the sea, started it, and watched it drill into the bottom of the sea. The underwater drone's diving distance was 5,000 meters. It carried the camera and dived into the bottom of the blue hole. Hua Xiaoheng stood behind Zhao Liangzi and watched the surveillance video of the underwater drone. The underwater drone was shaped like a torpedo and was very fast in the water. The number of diving distance continued to rise on the surveillance video. 1,000 meters, 2,000 meters, 3,000 meters, 4,000 meters. Finally, when they dived to 4,500 meters, something flashing with fluorescence entered their field of vision. A black object appeared on the surveillance video. It looked like a huge bullet-shaped streamlined object, and there seemed to be something flashing on the top of the object. This scene was too familiar. Hua Xiaoheng's heart beat violently. Yin Shixiang and Song Jining also walked over curiously. They stood on both sides of Hua Xiaoheng and watched the surveillance video together. Chen Lai saw that they had all come over and also tiptoed to look inside. Zhao Liangzi nervously increased the clarity of the surveillance video. They could finally see the fluorescence on the bullet-shaped streamlined object clearly. It was a line of fluorescent cursive words. Serious II. Hua Xiaoheng's heart almost skipped a beat. Pause first. Hua Xiaoheng took the keyboard from Zhao Liangzi and pressed the pause button. Serious II. There's really serious. Yin Shixiang almost shouted. Is this also a submarine? Why is it so small? If this thing was also a submarine, then it was about half as small as Sirius. It was very small and exquisite, and looked more like a banana boat ice cream. Hua Xiaoheng thought of the situation in Sirius. His heart, which had just jumped up, suddenly fell again, as if he had fallen into the unfathomable Mariana Trench. Zhao Liangzi also shouted, use the mechanical arm. And my little hummingbird robot go down together. Zhao Liangzi's hummingbird robot was actually an intelligent pinhole camera. Last time they had used the mechanical arm to bring this intelligent pinhole camera down with them. They had entered the submarine and investigated the situation inside. Hua Xiaoheng's hand holding the mouse trembled slightly, but his voice remained calm. Release the mechanical arm and little Zay's hummingbird robot. On the deck, the staff responsible for operating the mechanical arm's cables hung Zhao Liangzi's hummingbird robot on a special thin rope. At the lower end of the long rope, they carefully placed it into the pipe in the middle of the mechanical arm. This hummingbird robot was about the size of a freshwater pearl with a diameter of about 2 millimeters. It was almost impossible to tell that it was a camera. When they reached their destination, it could be reassembled. There would be 3 miniature rollers about 1 millimeter in diameter at the bottom that would carry it around to film. There was also a pair of wings that were as thin as cicada's wings that could stretch out from its back and fly with it to film. Just like the last time, the mechanical arm sank into the deep sea and finally touched the top of the small submarine. Then, the mechanical arm opened its 5 fingers, and the steel spikes at the top of its fingers pierced into the submarine's outer shell. Soon, the air collected from inside was continuously pumped up through a special pipe. Chen Lai and Song Jining acted as measurement experts and nervously measured the composition of the air. Just like last time, Chen Lai said in surprise, it's also nitrogen. Hua Xiaoheng's vision went black. He gripped the back of Zhao Liangzi's chair tightly and said calmly, continue, get your hummingbird to upload the image quickly. While they were measuring the air inside the submarine, Zhao Liangzi's hummingbird robot had already entered the submarine through the small hole pierced by the steel spikes on the mechanical arm's fingers and began to film along the way. This submarine was much smaller and simpler than Gu Xiangwen's. It was as if it was really a toy, although it was a toy with real submarine functions. The largest cabin in the middle of the submarine was arranged like a game room. There was a pink princess bed against the wall, and a little girl in a dress was lying on the bed. Although he hadn't seen the little girl's face yet, the corners of Hua Xiaoheng's eyes couldn't help twitching when he saw the dress. This dress was almost exactly the same as the dress Gu Nianji had worn 7 years ago. As the hummingbird robot flew above the little girl, the camera sent back a clear image. The little girl was fair and chubby. She lay there with her eyes closed, exactly the same as Gu Nianji from 7 years ago. This was today's chapter of 4,500 words, chapter 1452, The Secret Buried by Time, 10. A reminder for the monthly votes and recommendation votes, moi. Chapter 1464. Hua Xiaoheng's dark eyes stared unblinkingly at the surveillance video, but his thoughts had flown far away. Time seemed to turn back to that day 7 years ago. He remembered it very clearly. That morning, the director of the Imperial Institute of High Energy Physics, Bai Jini, suddenly said that there was a magnetic anomaly in Sea City. She wanted to go there to measure the magnetic anomaly's data, but she was worried that something would happen and needed powerful people to protect her, so she specifically asked Hua Xiaoheng to be there. The Bai family had a high status in the Huaxia Empire's political scene. In addition, she was Hua Xiaoheng's father, Hua Guanqin's girlfriend, so Hua Guanqin gave her face. He asked General Ji and Speaker Long for permission and ordered Hua Xiaoheng to bring the elite forces of the Special Operations Forces to Sea City to provide special security for Baijini. Because Hua Xiaoheng's Special Operations Forces did not have authorization, they could not interfere in domestic affairs. That time, because it was only a scientific expedition and not a political mission, General Ji and Speaker Long did not object and gave them special permission. In the beginning, everything was normal. Baijini brought her team and began to measure in the downtown area. It was almost noon, and the abnormal magnetic field gradually weakened. Baijini felt that it was about time, so she called for her team to retreat. Noon was the busiest time for that place, so they planned to give way. At that moment, a car suddenly barged in from somewhere. With a loud squeak, it suddenly caused a huge spark, and the entire car immediately fell into a sea of fire. At that time, Baijini was terrified and immediately asked everyone to evacuate. She did not care at all whether there was anyone in the car that had suddenly barged in. At that critical moment, Hua Xiaoheng, in accordance with his duty as a soldier, refused to stand by and watch. Ignoring the fire, he risked his life and rushed in to open the car door. He found a little girl wailing inside. He immediately reached out to the little girl who was so frightened that she was about to collapse. "Come, I'll get you out." The little girl's gaze shifted to him. Her small nose twitched and she shook her head desperately, refusing to let him carry her out. The fire outside the car was getting bigger and bigger, but the inside of the car was not affected. Hua Xiaoheng did not have time to think. He quickly went over to unfasten her seatbelt and forced her to turn around and escape from the car. He remembered the 12-year-old girl desperately struggling in the direction of the car, as if she did not want to be rescued by him. He had only run a few steps when he heard an earth-shattering explosion behind him. A huge wave of air hit them, throwing them both to the ground. He only had enough time to protect the little girl under his body, not letting the aftershock of the explosion hurt her at all. She cried herself hoarse and grabbed his collar tightly. The little girl was so scared that her whole body was twitching. In the end, she seemed to be unable to withstand such a huge impact, her head tilted to one side and she fainted. After the explosion stopped, Hua Xiaoheng stood up. He still remembered how he had held her in his arms and looked down at her. She closed her eyes and lay motionlessly in his arms. Her dark bangs covered her forehead. Her skin was fair and clean, and her round face was puffy. She looked very ordinary. Just like a montage in a movie, 7 years passed by in a flash. The fainted little girl he had once saved miraculously overlapped with the little girl lying motionless in the submarine. If the little girl in the submarine was also carrying a small backpack and holding a small doll, it would be a reenactment of the past. Hua Xiaoheng looked at the surveillance footage on the screen, and his consciousness blurred for a moment. It was as if what he had experienced all those years ago was just a dream. But how could it be a dream? That unprepossessing chubby little girl had grown up by his side. She had grown up from 12 years old to 19 years old now. He knew her so well. 7 years was enough for an ignorant little girl to grow into an adult. She was even his wife. However, the fair and chubby little girl in the submarine was also a reality, and it matched Gu Yanran's confession perfectly. Hua Xiaoheng's mind was spinning. He felt that the rationality he had held onto for so many years was about to leave him. He clenched one hand into a fist and covered his face with it. He coughed twice in a low voice and used his last bit of restraint to calmly order, "Salvage." The salvage ship's mechanical arm began to work. Hua Xiaoheng walked to the deck with one hand in his trouser pocket and the other holding a cigarette. He silently smoked in the blue hole in front of him. It had been a few days and nights since he had slept. Hua Xiaoheng urgently needed to clear his head, so he had been smoking more than before. Yin Shixiang understood Hua Xiaoheng's feelings. He walked over and smoked with Hua Xiaoheng. The two of them stood quietly at the bow of the ship and listened to the sound of the staff operating the mechanical arm on the opposite deck, as well as the sound of the waves. It was magnified in the night sky and spread far and wide. Yin Shixiang whispered, "Major General Hua, don't worry too much. Think broadly, Professor He, at least won't harm Nianji. I think Professor He definitely knows Nianji's whereabouts. Otherwise he wouldn't have disposed of all his assets, right? It must be to hide his whereabouts so that he can escape with Nianji." Hua Xiaoheng glanced at him indifferently. There was no pressure, but Yin Shixiang's neck felt cold for no reason. It was like being targeted by a bloodthirsty werewolf. Yin Shixiang was stunned after he finished speaking. He touched his neck and slapped himself hard in the face. He muttered, "If you don't know how to persuade others, then don't. Who told you to spout nonsense?" His words just now were indeed asking for a beating. Hua Xiaoheng flicked the ash off his cigarette and looked away from Yin Shixiang's neck. He looked in the direction of the blue hole and said, "Let's salvage Sirius 2 first. We'll talk about it later." Waiting for the little submarine. When 2 set sail, everyone on the ship was very nervous and in a bad mood. Zhao Liangzi became even more agitated and didn't want to watch the surveillance anymore. He went to the deck and operated his little hummingbird robot to take pictures everywhere. He actually captured quite a few pictures of the Caribbean Sea scenery that could be used directly as a desktop. Back in the cabin, he showed everyone the photos he had taken today and said to Yin Shixiang, "Big Xiong, look at this. Can we go to the photography exhibition directly?" Yin Shixiang glanced at it and saw that it was a photo taken in the evening. It was the time when the sun was about to set, and it was so round that it made one's hair stand on end. The evening glow in the blue sky was full, and the color was rich and rich. It was like a young girl wearing a grass skirt hanging in a tropical rainforest, and her posture was enchanting and bright. Not bad. Aren't your hands shaking out of habit?" Yin Shixiang snorted. "Who's habitually shaking their hands?" Zhao Liangzi glared at him. "You have no artistic talent. You have no appreciation standards." He got up and pushed Yin Shixiang away while cursing. Song Jining happened to turn around from her screen and saw the picture of the sunset on Zhao Liangzi's computer screen. She exclaimed, "It's so beautiful." Director Song knows what's good for you." Zhao Liangzi quickly said, "I have a higher definition one here. Do you want to see it?" Song Jining rubbed her eyes and walked over. "Okay, it's just nice to let my eyes rest." Zhao Liangzi, Yin Shixiang, pfft. Song Jining ignored them and sat down in Zhao Liangzi's seat. She held the mouse in her hand and right-clicked on the properties of the pictures to look through. In fact, Song Jining didn't have any artistic talent. She didn't look at the composition or color of these pictures, but at the pixel resolution and frequency coefficient. She could feel relaxed and happy just by looking at the data. Zhao Liangzi was also a computer expert, so he knew what Song Jining was looking at a glance. He couldn't help but feel even more depressed. Although Yin Shixiang had been in a bad mood for the past few days, he still felt much better when he saw Zhao Liangzi suffer. Song Jining looked at a group of photos and habitually began to combine all kinds of data in her mind. Gradually, she noticed some differences. She went back and looked at all the photos taken by Zhao Liangzi again. This time, she didn't look at the parameters of the photos, but at the photos themselves. Zhao Liangzi finally felt a little better. At that moment, Song Jining let out a soft, "eh," and said, "Little Zay, look at these 2 photos. Don't you think they're a little blurry?" Zhao Liangzi, Yin Shixiang. Director Song, Little Zay's hands are shaking out of habit. It's normal for them to be blurry. It's abnormal if they aren't blurry. Go. Get lost. Zhao Liangzi completely pushed Yin Shixiang away and sat next to Song Jining. "Director Song, which one are you talking about?" Song Jining placed the mouse on the 2 photos she was talking about and right-clicked on them. "Look, the parameters of this one and this one are exactly the same as the previous data, but these 2 are a little blurry than the previous and subsequent photos." Zhao Liangzi narrowed his eyes and looked at it for a long time. "I can't tell? It's clearly the same resolution, so how can it be blurry than the other photos?" His smart small camera's automatic focus function was internationally leading. Although Yin Shixiang always joked that his hands were habitually shaking, in fact, with the automatic shock absorption and focus function of his camera, shaking a little was not a problem at all. It did not affect the final imaging function at all. Song Jining nodded. "Oh, your eyesight might not be as good as mine. Do you want to print it out and look at it with a magnifying glass?" Zhao Liangzi, Yin Shixiang, being told that their eyesight was not as good as hers by a woman who was old enough to be their mother, this feeling, TSK, they really knew how it felt. However, their eyes were about to pop out of their sockets, but they couldn't see the difference. In the end, they obediently printed it out on the highest resolution image paper. As soon as they printed it out, they immediately saw the difference. There were 2 photos that were indeed a little more blurry than the other photos, and this blurry wasn't the kind of blurry that could not be focused due to shaking hands, but the kind that seemed to have double images. However, each image was equally clear. "What's going on?" Zhao Liangzi and Yin Shixiang were both astonished, not understanding what was going on. Song Jining held the 2 photos for a while and said, "This kind of phenomenon can only occur under one situation. When your hands are shaking. Yin Shixiang was still unwilling to give up on the theory of habitually shaking hands. Song Jining smiled and shook her head. No, when your hands are shaking, the edges of the image are blurry. The edges of the image in these two photos are clear, but there is still a blurred vision. This is a phenomenon that only occurs when there is a strong magnetic field. Because a strong magnetic field will cause uncertainty in matter. According to the theory of quantum mechanics, the same particle can appear in two different places at the same time. The state shown in these two photos is very close to this theory. And when the magnetic field energy is strong enough, it can make larger objects appear in two different places at the same time. Therefore, the two images that are slightly overlapping may look blurry, but it's actually because of the super strong magnetic field that they appear in two different places at the same time. There was a strong magnetic field here today, Song Jining concluded. She stood up and said, I'm going to check my instrument. Zhao Liangzi and Yin Shixiang were dumbfounded the whole time, blindfolded. Hua Xiaoheng walked in and frowned. They've already started fishing. Aren't you going to help? Zhao Liangzi and Yin Shixiang snapped out of their daze and secretly admired Song Jining's ability. She had actually managed to use her academic skills to almost fool two experienced Special Operations Forces personnel like them. Yes, Chief. The two of them hurriedly ran to the deck and participated in the final fishing process. Song Jining was also called out by Hua Xiaoheng to help monitor the construction of a sealed room filled with nitrogen gas below the deck. After the last salvage operation, Sirius I experience and now this Sirius II was much smaller, so it would have been easier to salvage. However, the terrain of the blue hole here was more complicated than the sea at the Cape of Good Hope. There were more reefs and the salvage ship could not get close. It could only rely on the mechanical arm to dive diagonally. This would take a lot of time. After the 5 fingers of the mechanical arm grabbed the small submarine, it lifted it from the bottom of the sea. Zhao Liangzi watched the staff controlling the mechanical arm carry out microprocessing through the monitor. They were really experienced. They could monitor the situation at the bottom of the sea through the camera on the mechanical arm and find a suitable route in time to avoid the complicated reefs. It was also because of this reason that the time they took was only 1 night less than the time they took to salvage Gu Xiangwen's large submarine. It took 2 days and 1 night to salvage Gu Xiangwen's large submarine. They took 2 days this time. Therefore, in the end, the small submarine Sirius II was also in the dark when it came out of the water. 2 whole days, 48 hours from night to day and from day to night. 48 hours later, the night sky was still dark. The sea was covered with thick clouds and it was drizzling. It rarely rained on the Caribbean Sea. It was either a clear sky or a torrential rain carried by a hurricane. It was rare to see such a poetic drizzle. A huge tent was set up on the medium-sized salvage ship, extending to about 20 meters from the surface of the sea. This kind of tent could block the surveillance of satellites in the sky. Similarly, Hua Xiaoheng did not want other countries' satellites to monitor what they were doing. After the tent was set up, they dragged the small submarine Sirius II out from the bottom of the sea and placed it on the deck of the salvage ship. Just like last time, a small enclosed room filled with nitrogen was temporarily set up below the deck. The small submarine that had just been salvaged, which looked like a banana boat ice cream, was placed in the middle of the room. Hua Xiaoheng and Chen Lai put on full-body protective suits, carried oxygen tanks and walkie-talkies, and entered the enclosed room. Song Jining helped them replace the air outside. After ensuring that there was only nitrogen in the room, they tried to open the door of the small submarine. Hua Xiaoheng only used a wire to open the door of the small submarine. He was very surprised. He leaned over to take a closer look and found that the lock was indeed not as complicated as the large submarine. Perhaps this small submarine was really a toy that Gu Xiangwen had given to little Nianji. Hua Xiaoheng and Chen Lai pushed open the door of the small submarine and walked in. For 2 big men like them, the small submarine was really too small. After walking for about 5 meters, they arrived at the game room where the little girl was lying. The floor of the game room was covered with log-colored floors, but there were colorful graffiti on the floor. They were probably all drawn by children, right? Chen Lai's attention was completely attracted by the little girl on the pink princess bed. He pushed Hua Xiaoheng's arm and wanted to walk over to take a look. Hua Xiaoheng nodded and let him do as he pleased. He continued to stare at the graffiti on the ground and carefully examine it. Chen Lai walked to the bed, reached out, and lifted the little girl's eyelids to take a look. He found that she was indeed dead. However, the submarine was filled with nitrogen, so her body was preserved. It was as if she had just fallen asleep and would wake up at any moment. Chen Lai shook his head and sighed. He thought to himself that he had to prepare the coffin again. He turned around and saw that Hua Xiaoheng was still staring at the graffiti on the ground. "What's wrong? Why are you looking at this child's drawing so carefully?" Qinlai asked curiously. Hua Xiaoheng said lightly, "This isn't an ordinary drawing." He raised his head and looked at the motionless little girl lying on the small bed with a complicated expression. He said, "This is a clue she left behind before she died. She used the drawing to tell us who killed her." This was today's chapter of 4,800 words, chapter 1453, The Secret Buried by Time 11. Remind everyone about the monthly votes and recommendation votes. Although I only have one chapter for the past few days, the number of words per day is enough to split into 2 chapters. But for this kind of plot, it's better to read the chapter, right? Moi. Chapter 1465. Qinlai turned around and was shocked. His eyes almost popped out of their sockets. "Really? Are you sure?" He quickly looked down at the ground. He had seen the messy lines when he came in and thought it was just a child's unconscious graffiti. When he took a closer look, he realized that on the clear log floor, there were extremely abstract matchstick figures drawn with a black carbon pen. It was only after Hua Xiaoheng's reminder that Qinlai could tell that they were small figures. "Qinlai? Just these little matchstick figures? How did you recognize the murderer?" Qinlai rubbed his chin and glanced at Hua Xiaoheng. Hua Xiaoheng walked to the leftmost picture on the log floor and pointed at it. "Look, it's a family. There's a father, a mother, this little girl and a sister." Before he found out who this little girl was, Hua Xiaoheng didn't want to call her Gu Nianji. He followed the traces of the picture and slowly walked to the right. He pointed at the second picture and whispered, "Dad and Mom went out and didn't take this little girl with them." She hugged her knees and cried in the corner. Sister came to comfort her. Took her to the banana boat. It was this small submarine. Then, Hua Xiaoheng couldn't continue and paused. "Then what?" Qinlai asked anxiously. He was engrossed in listening. Hua Xiaoheng took a deep breath. "Then, in the submarine, Sister gave her a glass of water. After drinking it, she fell asleep. When she woke up, she found that the door was locked. Sister wasn't here and neither were her parents. She cried for a while and gradually couldn't breathe. Finally, she understood what was going on. She picked up the carbon pen that she used to write daily and left these pictures on the floor. Finally." Hua Xiaoheng paused again. His already low voice was even more like the evening drum and morning bell. She still remembered to climb back into bed and tidy herself up. Even if she was going to die, she didn't want herself to look messy. She was a child who loved cleanliness. Qinlai tilted his head and looked at the pictures on the ground. He was dumbfounded. "How did you see so much content?" These children's scribbles were clearly abstract, like the most abstract drawings of the stream of consciousness. Hua Xiaoheng replied calmly, "This is how Nianji paints." Qinlai, so this was the experience of raising Nianji? Qinlai shook his head and suppressed the sadness in his heart. He walked to the far left and pointed to the first picture. "I can see that these are indeed 4 little matchstick people, but how can you tell that they are a family? And gender?" What was even more amazing was that he could tell who was older and who was younger. In his opinion, there was no difference between the 4 little stick men. Hua Xiaoheng's voice came out of the intercom calmly, as if he was narrating a documentary, without the slightest hint of emotion. "Look closely. These 4 stick men are all different in height, weight and weight. The taller ones are Daddy and Mommy. Daddy's face has D written on it, and Mommy's face has M written on it." The corners of Qinlai's mouth twitched. He simply lay on the ground to see the 2 crooked letters clearly. He didn't get up and simply continued to lie down. He reached out and gave Hua Xiaoheng a thumbs up to express his appreciation. "What about the older sister? How can you tell?" Qinlai asked again, looking at the remaining 2 little stick men. He didn't have Hua Xiaoheng's keen observation skills. Of course, more importantly, he hadn't raised Gu Nianji before, so he didn't know how to distinguish the stick men drawn by children. This stick man is shorter than Daddy and Mommy, but a little taller than the smallest person. Its hair is longer, so it's the older sister. Hua Xiaoheng walked to his side and stood near the picture. If he wasn't wearing a protective suit that covered him from head to toe, Qinlai would have rubbed his eyes. He felt that his eyesight must have deteriorated again. The 2 little stick men thought he was cross-eyed. Following Hua Xiaoheng's explanation, Qinlai looked at it again and understood a little. "This, the little dot next to the smallest stick man's head. What is it?" "It's tears," Hua Xiaoheng said softly. She's crying. Qinlai was speechless for a long time. Then the two over here are about the same height. One has long hair and the other has short hair. The two little stick men hold hands and walk out of a square. That's going out, right? Hua Xiaoheng nodded and replied, yes. Although the child stickman drawing was abstract, it still had its own unique ideographic logic in it. Oh, then this thing that looks like a banana must be the submarine. Qinlai continued to move to the right. Okay, how can you tell that it's the water my sister gave her to drink? I can only see that one little stickman is strangling the other little stickman's neck. The picture was so abstract that Qinlai felt like he was going blind. Hua Xiaoheng said expressionlessly, look between the two of them. It's written with water. Qinlai, forget it, he wasn't going to look anymore. He didn't want to be blind. Qinlai stood up from the floor. Hua Xiaoheng pointed at the picture at the back. Then she's asleep. You can tell, right? She's already lying on the ground. In fact, in Qinlai's eyes, it made no difference whether these extremely abstract stickmen were standing, kneeling, or lying down. However, he still pretended to see it and nodded. The picture after waking up is more complicated, Hua Xiaoheng said calmly. I only understood it after looking at it for a while. It was a picture of a little stickman kneeling in front of the door and knocking on it. There was a dialogue box diagonally above the little stickman's head with the words, Daddy, Mommy written inside. Then there was the little stickman sitting on the ground, holding his neck with his hands. His mouth was so wide that it almost occupied his entire head. All the pictures were actually very rough. It was obvious that the little girl who drew didn't have much talent in drawing. This was exactly the same as Gunyanji. However, when he thought about the situation at that time, it was extremely uncomfortable to think of a little girl who was about to die holding her last breath and leaving these pictures on the floor of the submarine with a carbon pen that would never fade. Qinlai stood up, his heart pounding. He opened the door and went out. Hua Xiaoheng didn't go out immediately. He thought of the structure of Gu Xiangwen's big submarine and the superb holographic projection system. He couldn't help looking around the small submarine room. If Gu Xiangwen loved his daughter so much that he had built a toy submarine for her, there was no reason for it not to have any safety measures, right? Normally, as long as a family had the slightest bit of money, they would install surveillance cameras in their children's rooms. Would there be surveillance cameras here too? Hua Xiaoheng remembered the location of the surveillance cameras in Gu Xiangwen's big submarine. He roughly figured out the location and walked to the right corner of the room. There was a flower-like floor lamp there. Hua Xiaoheng narrowed his eyes and looked around. Sure enough, he found the camera behind the floor lamp. He carefully removed the camera and surveillance system and put them in his backpack. He then walked to the pink princess's bed and quietly looked at the little girl who had been dead for 7 years. He bent down and pulled the blanket at the corner of the bed to cover her. He picked up a few strands of black hair from her pillow and put them in a transparent evidence bag before leaving the small submarine. Back on the deck, Qinlai took off his chemical suit and sat on a plastic stool with a bottle of beer. He held the bottle of beer and gulped it down in the Caribbean. Hua Xiaoheng returned to the cabin and changed into his regular clothes. He handed the camera and surveillance system to Zhao Liangzi and asked him to transfer the contents to the computer. He looked around the cabin and didn't see Qinlai. Hua Xiaoheng asked, "Where's Qinlai?" "On the deck." Yin Shixiang came over to help Zhao Liangzi. Hua Xiaoheng walked out of the cabin and saw Qinlai's back. He felt a little lonely. He walked over silently, sat down beside Qinlai and lit a cigarette. Qinlai didn't turn around, but from the corner of his eye, he knew it was Hua Xiaoheng. He took a few more sips from the beer bottle and muttered, "Who do you think that little girl is? Why does she look so much like Nianji 7 years ago? Is it her twin sister?" Qinlai was no stranger to Gu Nianji's appearance from 7 years ago. He had also been appointed by the military to be Gu Nianji's personal doctor 7 years ago. He and Hua Xiaoheng knew more about Gu Nianji than anyone else, but the two of them had a tacit understanding not to mention Gu Nianji's special constitution to anyone else. Hua Xiaoheng took a puff of his cigarette and looked at the coastline in front of him with a deep gaze. He sighed slightly and flicked the ash off his cigarette. He said calmly, "You have to be mentally prepared." As he spoke, he handed the evidence bag containing the little girl's hair to Qinlai. "Go for a DNA test and then verify the paternity of Gu Xiangwen." Qinlai looked at him sideways. He knew that Hua Xiaoheng was thinking about He Zhichu's situation and was worried that Gu Nianji's situation was similar to He Zhichu's. He Zhichu was already unrecognizable. He didn't want another Gu Nianji. The corners of his mouth twitched. "Me? You might as well say you have to be mentally prepared." Hua Xiaoheng looked at him calmly. "Stop pretending. Qinlai sneered. You still refuse to call that little girl's name. What are you afraid of? Qinlai knew Hua Xiaoheng too well. He knew that his every move had a deeper meaning. Hua Xiaoheng lowered his head slightly and said calmly, nothing. I don't know her name until I confirm her identity. Of course, no matter how strong he was, he would need time to digest the fact that he had to call a strange little girl his wife's name. So far he couldn't say that name. Qinlai shifted his gaze and looked at the distant sky. He whispered, when I entered the cabin just now, I heard little Zhe and Big Xiong discussing the quantum mechanics theory that Miss Song mentioned. Both of them were talking about whether this theory could explain Professor He and Yanji's situation. The problem was that there were two people who looked exactly the same. They were neither clones nor twins. What quantum mechanics? When Hua Xiaoheng entered, the two of them had already quieted down and were silent. Qinlai turned around and was about to speak when he saw Song Jining walking out. He quickly smiled and said, let Director Song speak for herself. This is the first update of the day, Chapter 1454, The Secret Buried by Time, 12. Remind everyone about the monthly and recommendation votes. Today is Monday, especially the recommendation votes at 8 p.m. The monthly ticket will be 5,500 plus updates. Mwah. Chapter 1466. There was a cool breeze blowing on the deck late at night. The surface of the sea was quiet and gentle, and the moonlight was like silver satin. The stars in the sky were like diamonds falling on the dark blue sky, sparkling and translucent. They were not in the mood to enjoy such a beautiful night. Hua Xiaoheng turned to look. Miss Song, what quantum mechanics are Big Xiong and Little Zhe talking about? They even said it's more similar to Nianji and Professor He's situation? Song Jining walked to his side and held the railing of the ship with both hands. She thought for a moment and said, are they talking about the phenomenon of the super-strong magnetic field I discovered causing the scenery to overlap? Hua Xiaoheng, Qinlai scratched his head. I think so. They're saying could it be? Professor He and Yanji were also overlapped. Was that why there were two people who looked exactly the same? Song Jining's lips twitched. They can really imagine. She paused and shifted her gaze to the sea. She began to explain, I might not have made it clear before. First of all, quantum mechanics is more about the phenomena of the microscopic world. The phenomena of the macroscopic world can't be directly copied from this theory. Seeing that Hua Xiaoheng and Qinlai were silent, Song Jining knew that they didn't understand either. Fortunately, she had already heard from Zhao Liangze and Yin Shixiang about the little girl in the submarine in the cabin just now. She also knew that this little girl might be the real Gu Nianji, and that she looked exactly the same as the Gu Nianji they were once familiar with. Even their DNA might be the same. Although the little girl's DNA hadn't been tested yet. Song Jining thought about Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangze's bold words and smiled. She continued, in the microscopic world described by quantum mechanics, particles can indeed appear in different places at the same time. But we're talking about particles here, not people or things in the macroscopic world. I told them just now that the photos taken by Little Zhe were blurry, but the overlapping phenomenon of clear boundaries is indeed similar to this theory. But there's another explanation for this phenomenon in the macroscopic world. It can't simply be explained as the same scene appearing in different places at the same time. Hua Xiaoheng was silent for a moment. Then what's your explanation? Song Jining made a gesture. If we have to use the macroscopic world to apply the theory of quantum mechanics, then it's Schrödinger's cat. When the cat is in the box, it can be alive and dead at the same time. As the saying goes, dead and alive. But when you open the box and found the cat, there was only one state left. At this time, whether it's alive or dead, there's only one state. It's either alive or dead. There won't be a situation where it's both alive and dead at the same time. Do you understand? So if you insist on using He Zhichu and Yanji's situation, I don't think it's appropriate. What's not suitable? Hua Xiaoheng understood a little, and a glimmer of hope rose in his heart. Because in the theory of Schrödinger's cat, there is only one cat from beginning to end. Whether it is dead or alive or both, it only appears in one cat. There has never been two cats. And the situation you're facing now is that there are two He Zhichu and possibly two Gu Nianji. In one group, He Zhichu and Gu Nianji have already grown up, but in the other group they all died when they were young. You even found their corpses. How can they be the same as Schrödinger's cat? What are you guys thinking? Song Jining sighed. I don't believe they're clones either, so the problem is still with their DNA. Hua Xiaoheng frowned. But Qinlai has already tested their DNA and confirmed that Nianji, who grew up with us, is indeed Gu Xiangwen's daughter. If the little girl in this small submarine is also Gu Xiangwen's daughter and has the same DNA as Nianji, then it's the same situation as He Zhichu and the 16-year-old boy. Then why do you say the problem is still with the DNA? Hua Xiaoheng was extremely puzzled. Song Jining raised an eyebrow. Are the two of them really the same DNA? Her sharp gaze turned to Qinlai. There are 6 billion base pairs in the human chromosome. Have you really compared all the base pairs? Including the order in which they are arranged? How is that possible? Qinlai smiled bitterly. It's impossible to compare 6 billion base pairs according to the order in which they are arranged. So you didn't compare all the base pairs, so you can't say that their DNA is exactly the same. Song Jining was a standard scientist. She was very particular about rigorous reasoning and logic. When ordinary people said, exactly the same, it was actually a general category. However, in Song Jining's opinion, if the two people really had the same DNA, then they would need to compare every base pair to reach this conclusion. Without a set of base pairs to compare, they couldn't say that the two of them were exactly the same, even if they looked exactly the same. Qinlai couldn't believe his ears. You mean we have to compare all their DNA base pairs? 6 billion base pairs. Song Jining nodded and said implicitly, I know this is a lot of work, but before we find a suitable theory to guide the appraisal, we can only use the exhaustive method. Hua Xiaoheng frowned and looked at Qinlai. You didn't use the exhaustive method to compare before? Hee hee. Qinlai laughed dryly. Major General Hua, everyone has 6 billion base pairs in their DNA. 6 billion plus the order of the sequence. Do you know what that means? Hua Xiaoheng looked at him quietly. This is your job scope. You're asking me? Qinlai blushed at his words. After a while he said embarrassedly, Major General Hua, using DNA to test the relationship of immediate family and comparing the sequence of all the DNA base pairs of two people are two different things. Speak human language. Hua Xiaoheng raised his voice. Don't talk to me about biomedical terms. Qinlai pushed his glasses up with his hand and said thoughtfully, using DNA to test the relationship of immediate family actually only needs to test 3 kinds of unique microsatellites. DNA can do it. The usual practice is to determine the 3 kinds of microsatellites contained in the father and mother. DNA. As long as you can find these kinds of microsatellites in children, DNA can be confirmed. We can be sure that they are biological children. If you can't find any of these, then you're 100% sure that they're not immediate family. Hua Xiaoheng listened for a long time and digested it. He said, You mean there are 2 situations when DNA is used to test the relationship of immediate family. One is that there is an immediate family relationship, and the other is that there is no immediate family relationship. Using this method, we can very accurately rule out the situation where the two of them don't have an immediate family relationship, that is, they aren't biological father and son or mother and son. But to determine their immediate family relationship, we can't be 100% sure? Yes, that's what I mean. Qinlai nodded at Hua Xiaoheng. When I compared the DNA of Professor He and the 16-year-old boy's skeleton, I did the same thing. I compared these microsatellites and found that they were exactly the same. The DNA was exactly the same. Even the usual mutation nodes were exactly the same. But what? Hua Xiaoheng's gaze sharpened. Song Jining understood and explained to Hua Xiaoheng, I understand what Qinlai means. But from the current situation, only a few groups of microsatellites and DNA can be compared. They can't meet our test requirements at all. Simply put, to do an immediate family identification, they only needed to test 3 random microsatellites. The DNA series would do. However, to prove that the DNA of the 2 people was exactly the same, they had to compare all 6 billion base pairs of them. When the 2 numbers of 3 billion and 6 billion were compared, anyone with a discerning eye would know the workload and difficulty of the latter. Compared to the former, it was of course a geometric increase. She turned to look at Qinlai. So you should still compare the 6 billion base pairs of the 2 of them according to the order they were arranged one by one to figure out what the situation is? Because in terms of DNA itself, the difference between people wasn't that big. Then, to really do all the DNA comparisons, they would need to compare the 6 billion base pairs according to the original order. Hua Xiaoheng had originally believed in Qinlai's test for He Zhichu's situation. Now that he heard Song Jining say that there seemed to be other situations, he immediately looked at Qinlai. You haven't done a comparison of the 6 billion base pairs before? This is today's second monthly ticket for 5,500 plus updates. Chapter 1455, Schrodinger's cat only has one. Remind everyone about the monthly and recommendation tickets. Today is Monday, especially the recommendation tickets. Moi. Chapter 1467. Of course not. Qinlai's face was bitter. There are so many base pairs. How can I have the time? Besides, the international identification methods aren't so complicated. The situation is special now. We have to compare them one by one, Song Jining said seriously. Science cannot allow any falsehoods or guesses. Qinlai, don't be lazy. Hua Xiaoheng also looked at Qinlai and said indifferently, Miss Song is right. From now on, I will monitor your entire sequencing and comparison process from beginning to end. I will not let go of a single detail. But the world's recognized method of identifying immediate family relationships is the method I used. No one would compare the sequence of all the base pairs. There's no need for that. Qinlai felt wronged. And I don't have such a powerful computer. I want to compare their two sets of chromosomes. There are a total of 6 billion base pairs. Using the equipment in my laboratory, it will take about 100 years to complete the comparison according to the sequence of the base pairs. Hua Xiao, can you wait 100 years? Qinlai looked at Hua Xiaoheng from the corner of his eyes. So it was because his computing ability couldn't keep up. Song Jining's heart skipped a beat and she looked at Hua Xiaoheng inquiringly. Hua Xiaoheng understood what Song Jining meant and nodded. Yes. This was permission for Song Jining. Song Jining whispered, Little Qin, our Institute of High Energy Physics has just developed a prototype quantum computer. Although it's only a prototype and can't be programmed, its computing ability is 1,000,000 times faster than the most powerful computer today. In theory, a completed quantum computer could be 100 million times faster than the current computer, but Song Jining and the others had yet to reach such a theoretical height. The current prototype quantum computer's computing ability could only be 1,000,000 times faster than the most powerful computer today. However, this 1,000,000 times was enough for their full DNA base pair comparison. This was a top secret of the military, so Song Jining needed Hua Xiaoheng's authorization to say it. Wow, so fast. Qinlai couldn't help but be excited. It's 1,000,000 times faster than the fastest computer today. That means, Qinlai wanted to count with his fingers. He hated that he had so few fingers. Song Jining didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She said softly, in terms of time, it'll take about 2.5 days to complete the comparison. It won't take as long as 100 years. That's great. I'll start the comparison immediately when I get back. 3 billion base pairs. If there's one less comparison, you can chop my head off. Qinlai was elated and almost worshipped Song Jining. Song Jining smiled and patted Hua Xiaoheng's shoulder. Don't worry. Only when the 3 billion base pairs are exactly the same or even in the same order, can it mean that they're the same person. Otherwise they're different people. So, don't jump to conclusions so early. Miss Song, if you're free, should we discuss whether there's an optimized comparison method? Qinlai followed Song Jining into the cabin like a tail. Hua Xiaoheng looked at their backs and reminded Qinlai, do a simple check on the little girl's immediate family relationship with Gu Xianguan. When we get back, use the exhaustive method to verify her relationship with Nianji. Qinlai waved his hand behind him and quickly said, Got it. I was planning to do that anyway. Qinlai and Song Jining went to the cabin together. As they discussed the verification method, they began to use simple equipment to test the DNA on the strand of hair. The technology for paternity tests was already very mature and not cumbersome, so this matter could be carried out immediately. However, if it was confirmed that the little girl who died 7 years ago was also Gu Xiangwen's daughter, then it had to be compared with Gu Nianji's DNA. It was the same as He Jichu's situation. Therefore it was only a rough test now. The specific sequencing comparison could only be carried out with a quantum computer when they got back. Hua Xiaoheng sat alone on the deck, smoking and waiting for the results. Although it was a simple test, the fastest result would still take 10 hours. During this time, the salvage ship they were on left the Blue Hole and returned to the Gu family's port in Barbados. 10 hours later, Qinlai brought him the results. It's easier to determine the immediate family relationship. This little girl is indeed Gu Xiangwen's biological daughter. Qinlai sighed. I've roughly compared her DNA with Nianji. I think her situation is indeed the same as Professor He's and the young man who died at the age of 16. Of course, to completely confirm that their DNA is exactly the same, I'll have to wait until I get back and use Miss Song's quantum computer to conduct a comprehensive comparison before I can make a true conclusion. But for now, He Jichu and Nianji's situation is very similar. What did this mean? This meant that He Jichu and Gu Nianji did have a connection that they didn't know about. Just this point alone made Hua Xiaoheng frown. Are you saying that they really don't have twin siblings? Qinlai really couldn't understand this phenomenon. Hua Xiaoheng looked at the results of the test that Qinlai had given him and said calmly, the nanny said that He Jichu's father didn't have twins. As for Professor He, we don't know where he came from or where he went. What about Nianji? Qinlai asked. Did Gu Xiangwen have twins? You'll have to ask Gu Yanran about that. Hua Xiaoheng took the results and went to the cabin where Gu Yanran was being held. Gu Yanran was still wearing her ankles and handcuffs, and she was uncomfortably turning the electronic collar around her neck. Hua Xiaoheng sat down in front of her and asked calmly, how many biological daughters does Gu Xiangwen have? Of course there's only one. Go to Barbados to investigate. Gu Nianji was born in the hospital there. Gu Yanran pursed her lips and said disapprovingly. Hua Xiaoheng looked at her quietly and sat down calmly in front of her. He crossed his legs and said calmly, tell me, how did you kill that little girl? Gu Yanran trembled, and her hand stopped at the edge of the electronic collar around her neck. Her voice was very nervous. You found her? Hua Xiaoheng nodded. Gu Yanran's eyes widened. Really? Can you let me see her? Hua Xiaoheng showed her the video that he and Qinlai had recorded in the small submarine. For the time being, he didn't mention that there were cameras and surveillance cameras in the small submarine. Gu Yanran immediately let out a cry of surprise when she saw what was inside the submarine. Soon tears flowed down her face. She covered her face and sobbed. I didn't do it on purpose. Nianji cried for her parents. I couldn't coax her for a long time, so I took her to the submarine to play. That was a toy that Father Gu Xiangwen specially made for her. She could sit in it and swim at the bottom of the sea. Later she lost her temper and pushed me out. She locked herself in there alone. I didn't know what she was going to do. Then the submarine sank and malfunctioned. I had no choice. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to. I didn't dare to let anyone know. I was afraid that others would think that I killed her. It really wasn't. It was just an accident. Gu Yanran cried her heart out, like a sister who was extremely sad about the death of her younger sister. Hua Xiaoheng looked at her and thought that if he hadn't seen those pictures in the surveillance cameras, her story might have been able to fool some people. You didn't want to? If you didn't want to, why did you give her water mixed with sleeping pills? Hua Xiaoheng had deduced it from the little girl's drawings and then verified it from the surveillance cameras. Gu Yanran stopped crying and her eyes became more and more evasive. What did you say? What sleeping pills? I don't understand. I don't know what happened in the submarine. Hua Xiaoheng took a step forward and looked at her condescendingly. Gu Yanran, when you found out that something had happened to Gu Xiangwen and his wife, you immediately tricked her into taking the submarine out to sea, then gave her water mixed with sleeping pills. Finally, you locked the submarine and released nitrogen gas, suffocating her to death. Hua Xiaoheng pulled out his gun and aimed it at Gu Yanran's forehead. Gu Yanran, you're a murderer. Look at these pictures. Although she's young, she's not stupid. She's drawn everything you've done to her. Gu Yanran looked at the matchstick figures and sneered. You want to convict me based on these random drawings? Major General Hua, you're being too biased. Aren't you treating human life like grass? She still wanted to argue? Hua Xiaoheng waved his hand. Other than these pictures, you don't know that there are surveillance cameras in the small submarine, do you? Gu Yanran trembled and raised her head in disbelief. Her voice was so shrill that it cracked. What did you say? What surveillance cameras? For more than a decade, she had behaved so well in front of Gu Xiangwen and his wife. She had taken great care of Gu Nianji, and she had been the same in front of and behind people. In the end, not only did Gu Nianji trust her and treat her as her own sister, even Gu Xiangwen's wife said that she wanted to treat her as her own daughter. Why did they still install surveillance cameras? Were they worried that she would harm their precious daughter? Liars. They were all liars. Had these people never truly believed her? The biggest blow to Gu Yanran wasn't that her scheme had been exposed, but that the people she thought she had deceived were actually still wary of her. Hua Xiaoheng waved his hand, and Zhao Liangzi immediately played the surveillance footage from the small submarine's game room. On the big screen on the wall, they clearly saw Gu Yanran bringing a little girl into the game room. She turned around and closed the door. She turned on the television in the game room for the little girl to watch and went to the next room to pour a glass of water. There was also a camera in the next room, and it was all captured by the surveillance system. Gu Yanran took out 2 white pills from her pocket, removed the sugar coating and put them into the water. Then she stirred them twice. The camera turned, and Gu Yanran was already standing in front of the little girl, asking her to drink the water. The little girl didn't want to drink the water, but Gu Yanran's expression changed and she grabbed the little girl's throat. The little girl opened her mouth in surprise and looked at her. Gu Yanran took advantage of this moment to pour the water into the little girl's mouth. The little girl was forced to drink the glass of water, and not long after, she lay motionless on the floor. The camera fast-forwarded and the little girl woke up again. She looked around, then went to the door and knocked hard on it. However, no one paid attention to her. She gradually felt it was difficult to breathe, so she held her neck and knelt down in front of the door. She seemed to have understood what was happening. She turned around and took a black carbon pen, then began to draw on the floor. In the end, she used her remaining strength to climb back onto the bed, tidied her hair, and quietly closed her eyes. Wu Xiaoheng gestured for Zhao Liangzi to stop. Gu Yanran, what else do you want me to say? Gu Yanran looked at the surveillance footage expressionlessly and said, "It's actually just vitamins. What do you think it is? If I want her life." "Shut up. There's still footage of you opening the button inside the submarine and releasing nitrogen gas. Do you want to see it?" Wu Xiaoheng said calmly, "The entire process of your crime is preserved here. Gu Xiangwen never really believed you, right? Although you've been pretending well, he's still wary of you." However, this precaution wasn't strong enough, so Gu Yanran still succeeded. Gu Yanran's psychological defense finally collapsed, and she started crying. "Since they've never believed me, I don't feel guilty anymore. Yes, I'm a murderer. Just kill me. You're right. I've never liked her. So fat, so ugly, and so bad-tempered. Who would have the patience to take care of this bad child who would die one day?" Gu Xiangwen said that Gu Nianji wouldn't live past the age of 18. "I just let her die 6 years early." Wu Xiaoheng was slightly stunned. When did Gu Xiangwen say that? Gu Yanran's crying quieted down. He was talking to his wife. "I overheard it in secret. Why won't she live past the age of 18? Because she has congenital genetic deficiency syndrome," Gu Yanran said hatefully. "All the daughters of the Gu family have it. My mother made a backup for them and I want to make a backup too. I don't want this to happen." Chen Lai sneered. "Don't flatter yourself. Do you think you're that important? Actually, Gu Xiangwen hasn't developed a suitable treatment. The bone marrow of you and your mother, Gu Jing, can only treat the symptoms and alleviate some of the symptoms. It can't cure the root cause. So with or without you, that little girl won't change much. Unless there was a powerful gene like Gu Nianji that could repair itself, it would be possible to save that little girl's life. But if that little girl was Gu Nianji from 7 years ago, then did she save her own life? But if she really saved her own life, then what about this little girl's body? This dead little girl was the real Gu Nianji, Gu Xiangwen's daughter. Because she had Gu Yanran and the surveillance cameras in the small submarine, as well as Gu Xiangwen's last words as evidence. Then who was the Gu Nianji who had grown up beside them? Logic had reached a dead end here, and their worldview was about to receive a new baptism. Gu Xiangwen took in you and your daughter as a charity. Do you really think you can help save people? Chen Lai continued to mock them. He rolled his eyes so disdainfully that he almost rolled them to the sky. Gu Yanran couldn't take it anymore, but she couldn't resist. Just as she was agitated, the electronic collar around her neck tightened, and she was so suffocated that she saw stars. Wu Xiaoheng said coldly, "Even if she has a terminal illness, it can't be a legitimate reason for you to kill her. Is it so hard to admit that you just want to seize the Gu family's inheritance? This little girl is the one you lived with since you were young, Gu Nianji?" At this point, Wu Xiaoheng could finally call the girl Gu Nianji. Gu Yanran nodded and trembled to calm herself down. She looked up at Wu Xiaoheng and said timidly, "She's the real Gu Nianji, Gu Xiangwen's daughter. I lived with their family for more than 10 years. From the moment Gu Nianji was born to the moment she left this world, she never left the Caribbean Sea. You don't even know what the fake beside you is, do you?" Looking at Wu Xiaoheng's expressionless and handsome face, Gu Yanran was indignant and asked provocatively, "What's wrong? Did you realize that you loved the wrong person? Do you regret it?" This was today's chapter of 4,400 words, chapter 1456, Loving the Wrong Person? There was only one update today. P.S. Yesterday's second update, Schrodinger's cat only has one, was revised. The base pairs of the human chromosome were 3 billion, and the base pairs were 6 billion. Thank you for pointing it out. The 6 billion base pairs mentioned later were 2 sets of chromosomes. Those who were not familiar with this content could pretend to understand, but it would not affect the main plot. Moi. Chapter 1468. Hua Xiaoheng looked at her without batting an eyelid. Although he was greatly shocked, he didn't show it on his face. However, the other spectators did not have such good self-control and self-restraint. Your nagging attitude is really disgusting. Qinlai mocked her rudely. They're a loving couple. What does that have to do with an ugly freak like you? Gu Yanran's face turned as red as pig's blood. She was about to retort when Hua Xiaoheng said calmly, "You have a murder case on you. Tell me honestly how you killed little Nianji. Leniency for those who confess, severity for those who resist." At this moment, Hua Xiaoheng finally understood what He Zhichu's text meant when he said, "If you want to avenge little Nianji, kill Gu Yanran for her life." Did He Zhichu already know about this little Nianji? However, he didn't say a word. He even deliberately led everyone's attention and hinted that the amnesiac Gu Nianji beside them was Gu Xiangwen's daughter. Hua Xiaoheng's expression froze. He immediately asked Gu Yanran, "When did you meet He Zhichu?" 3 years. Oh no, it should be 4 years ago. What? Gu Yanran was confused. You only met her 4 years ago? Hua Xiaoheng was surprised. The He and Gu families aren't family friends? I don't know. You have to ask Gu Xiangwen. Unfortunately, he's already dead. Gu Yanran shrugged, looking numb. In other words, what the nanny said was most likely true. Hua Xiaoheng frowned. Could it be that little He Zhichu and his father had really died not long after they left the small town of Uni in Bolivia? If that was the case, Professor He would be even more troublesome to deal with. As Hua Xiaoheng pondered, he said to Gu Yanran, "Tell me about how you murdered little Nianji." Gu Yanran didn't want to say it, but when Hua Xiaoheng narrowed his eyes, she couldn't help but remember the fear of being tortured with electrodes. He closed his eyes and resigned himself to his fate. She could tell that Hua Xiaoheng was on the verge of exploding, even though he appeared calm. However, the man's calmness on the surface couldn't conceal the bloodthirsty coldness in his eyes. It could also be that people had a special desire to talk before they died. Gu Yanran began to confess her crimes while trembling with fear. "I don't like Gu Nianji. I haven't liked her since I was young. She is so ugly, has a bad temper, and is not in good health, but they all like her. Compared to her, I'm the dog's tail grass in the corner, and she's the rose in the garden. Tisk, it's just a dead rose. However, I was the only one who accompanied her since she was young, and she listened to everything I said. I told her to go east, but she didn't dare to go west." A sickly smile appeared on Gu Yanran's face. Qinlai couldn't take it anymore. "You just said that little Nianji has a bad temper, but now she's obedient to you. If you tell her to go east, she won't dare to go west. So, does she have a good temper, or are you making it up to smear her name?" Gu Yanran choked and turned her head to say, "She used to have a bad temper, but after we got to know each other better, she became very obedient. In short, you can't escape the blame for smearing her name." Qinlai's face darkened. "I don't want to listen to such a meaningless and illogical confession. I'll go out first." Hua Xiaoheng nodded. "Close the door." After Qinlai left, Zhao Liangzi and Yin Shixiang were still in the cabin. The two of them were more well-behaved and had been recording and listening from the side. They weren't as sarcastic and questioning as Qinlai. Qinlai left angrily. Gu Yanran restrained herself and didn't say anything else to slander little Nianji. She lowered her head and twisted the corner of her shirt with one hand. She continued, "Later, news came from Japan that they had already hijacked Gu Xiangwen's plane. I acted according to plan and took her to the submarine." She stopped talking after she finished speaking. Hua Xiaoheng was already clear about the situation in Japan. He was only concerned about Gu Nianji's whereabouts. After waiting for a while, seeing that Gu Yanran still didn't speak, Hua Xiaoheng could only ask calmly, "What happened after entering the submarine?" Gu Yanran looked up at him. "Don't you already know? We need you to say it again. Why did you choose the location of the submarine sinking in the blue hole? Why was there an electric fence there?" Hua Xiaoheng asked one by one. Gu Yanran was scared out of her wits by his electrode torture. As long as he asked, she would subconsciously speak. "I chose the blue hole because I knew there was an electric fence there. Gu Xiangwen is a very powerful person. He said that there seemed to be something wrong with the blue hole. I don't remember clearly. It was probably a magnetic field or something." Hua Xiaoheng's heart skipped a beat. It was a magnetic field again. Song Jining had also said that she had detected the residual energy of a super strong magnetic field here. Also, the day Gu Nianji appeared in Sea City, there was also an abnormal magnetic field. Thinking of this, Hua Xiaoheng felt that it was necessary to go back and interrogate Bai Jini. 7 years ago, Bai Jini had suddenly said that there was a special magnetic field somewhere in Sea City. She didn't seem to have mentioned her source of information. It was obvious that Bai Jini was hiding something. She had been sentenced to death with a 2-year reprieve for murdering Hua Xiaoheng's uncle Hua Guanyuan's wife, Luo Xinxue. It had already been a year. If this matter hadn't been exposed, no one would have known what she had hidden after she was executed. Hua Xiaoheng's mind raced. He had already determined his target when he returned to the country, but he was still looking at Gu Yanran quietly. Gu Yanran continued. I just need to get the submarine to the blue hole and let it sink. No one will find out. Because trespassing into this place will trigger the electric fence. I've seen the electric fence activated once. It was very scary. She looked up at Hua Xiaoheng. You've seen it once too. That time she had almost taken Gu Nianji's life. Hua Xiaoheng couldn't help but recall that in order to save them, she had risked her life to enter and exit the blue hole several times when the electric fence was shining brightly. Did she know that she and little Nianji had brushed past each other here? Did she feel that little Nianji, who was related to her, was also sleeping at the bottom of this sea when she was on the verge of death? This kind of association was like a sharp blade stabbing at him again and again. It was as if it wanted to dig out his heart, cut it into pieces and scatter it in this sea. Gu Yanran was very afraid when she saw Hua Xiaoheng's face suddenly turn ashen. She quickly said, That's right. I can't tell anyone that she's dead. I can only say that she's missing. Because if she said that little Nianji was dead, she had to hand over the body. If she couldn't hand over the body, how could she say that she was dead? Only the murderer could say with certainty that the victim was dead without seeing the body. Of course, Gu Yanran didn't want to be accused of being a murderer. She was just waiting for 7 years. After little Nianji had disappeared for 7 years, she would be able to accept the Gu family's assets. Gu Yanran pursed her lips and said, 4 years ago, I met Professor He and his assistant Wen Shui in the United States. I hired lawyer Wen to represent me. They were the ones who encouraged me to go to the Huaxia Empire to find a backer. She regretted it so much that her intestines turned green. She actually didn't need a backer, but He Jichu and Wen Shui had encouraged her. In addition, the Japanese felt that it was a good idea for her to go to the Huaxia Empire. She could help them gather more information about the upper class of the Huaxia Empire, so they agreed to let her contact the Huaxia Secret Service. Now that she thought about it, if she hadn't gone to the Huaxia Empire, she wouldn't have met the fake Gu Nianji, and she wouldn't have provoked Hua Xiaoheng and caused all this trouble that would cause her to die a tragic death. Hua Xiaoheng recalled the first time Gu Yanran saw Gu Nianji. He said calmly, The first time you saw Nianji, you didn't recognize her. Gu Yanran shook her head with a bitter smile. When I first heard her name, I was so scared that I almost went crazy. But when I saw her face again, I was relieved. I thought it was just someone with the same name. Why? Hua Xiaoheng asked very carefully. He didn't want to miss any clues related to Gu Nianji. Gu Yanran cried out involuntarily, Can't you tell? What was Nianji like when she was young? How could she grow up to be so beautiful? Not only was she beautiful, but she was also tall and curvy. She was many times better than the figure that Gu Yanran had once been proud of. Gu Yanran was deeply jealous. She didn't believe that the fake Gu Nianji had anything to do with the real little Nianji. It wasn't until later that I found out that she actually claimed to be Gu Xiangwen's biological daughter and wanted to compete with me for the family property. Gu Yanran said hatefully. How dare she? She could even fake DNA. So, you still think that Nianji's DNA test was fake? Hua Xiaoheng crossed his arms in deep thought. Actually, her DNA test with little Nianji shows that they are Gu Xiangwen's biological daughters. There's nothing fake about it. Are you sure that Gu Xiangwen really didn't have twins? Absolutely not. That's impossible. Gu Yanran was firm. The little girl in the submarine is the real Gu Nianji. Hua Xiaoheng, you've recognized the wrong person and fallen in love with the wrong person. Doesn't your conscience hurt after doing so much for a fake? Hua Xiaoheng moved his fingers and resisted the urge to slap Gu Yanran to death. He turned around and said, Take her away and temporarily detain her for espionage and murder. He left the Caribbean Sea with the salvage ship and came to the high seas. There, he handed over the small submarine to the Huaxia Empire's warship and sent it back to the country. Yin Shixiang specially escorted it. Hua Xiaoheng returned to Barbados with the rest of the people and took the special plane that was parked in Barbados to return home first. As soon as he returned to the imperial capital, Hua Xiaoheng ordered someone to call Yi Xian. In order to confirm little Nianji's identity, Hua Xiaoheng also wanted other evidence besides DNA. Yi Xian heard that they had found the body of a little girl in the blue hole of the Caribbean Sea and immediately came to the Special Operations Forces. He sat in the small conference room and saw the situation inside the small submarine on the big screen. He also saw the little girl lying quietly on the pink princess bed. Yi Xian's tears burst out. He covered his face and sobbed silently. He choked and said, "Yes, this is the little Nianji in my memories. She doesn't like to write and she doesn't like to talk much. I mentioned these little matchstick men to her when I was chatting with her on the internet. She likes them very much. I should have known that I had the wrong person. She drew a lot of pictures of me online and they were all like this. Later I thought Gu Yanran was her and I even asked her why she stopped drawing matchstick figures. She said her sister didn't allow her to draw them. I also thought that her sister was too overbearing. Because she didn't like her sister, she didn't even allow her to draw her favorite matchstick figures. Later something happened to Uncle Gu. I heard that little Nianji had disappeared, and Gu Yanran was the only one left to support the huge family fortune. It was difficult to support it alone, so I came back to help her." Yi Xian spoke intermittently about what had happened back then. He was extremely regretful about his choice and mistake. Hua Xiaoheng listened expressionlessly from the side and suddenly said, "Did you realize that you loved the wrong person and regret it?" Yi Xian's eyes reddened and he nodded heavily. "Of course I regret it. I regret it so much. Little Nianji and I have known each other since we were young. But Gu Yanran made me think that she was the little girl who saved me and chatted with me online. Do you want to see Gu Yanran?" Hua Xiaoheng folded his hands and placed them on the desk in front of him. His voice was calm and his tone was flat. Yi Xian shook his head decisively and said with a look of disdain, "Why haven't you shot her yet? She has done so many wrong things, committed so many crimes and even killed a child. How can you let her get away with it?" Hua Xiaoheng knocked on the desk. "Let me correct you. We didn't let her get away with it. She has always been in our custody. It's just that there are still some things that haven't been closed, so we haven't shot her yet." "You mean you'll shoot her?" Yi Xian looked up abruptly and his eyes lit up. "If that day comes, can you let me watch the execution?" "What?" Hua Xiaoheng suddenly felt that Yi Xian had quite a heavy taste. "I want to see how she dies." Yi Xian snorted. "Then, I want to draw her fate into a matchstick figure and burn it for little Nianji to see." Hua Xiaoheng was silent. He couldn't refuse this request. This man was supposed to be the only man who truly treated little Nianji well other than Gu Xiangwen, right? If Hua Xiaoheng's guess was right, this Yi Xian might be the son-in-law that Gu Xiangwen had specially chosen for little Nianji. If that day comes, I'll let you know. Hua Xiaoheng was very conflicted. After all, he already treated Gu Xiangwen as his father-in-law, but this had suddenly happened. He stood up and finally said, "Everything you said and did here today has been recorded. Do you mind if I show it to others?" Yi Xian was stunned. "I didn't say anything illegal just now, did I?" The corners of Hua Xiaoheng's mouth twitched. "No, don't worry. This is your privacy. Even if there's something wrong, it won't be used as evidence in court." Yi Xian breathed a sigh of relief. "That's up to you. I believe you'll know what to do." After hesitating for a while, he finally asked, "According to the video you showed me, little Nianji died 7 years ago. Then the woman beside you, who is she? Why is she also called Gu Nianji? And I remember you saying that she's also Uncle Gu's daughter. You've done a DNA test. The DNA isn't fake, right?" Anyone who knew the 19-year-old Gu Nianji would have this question when they saw the 12-year-old little Nianji's body, right? Hua Xiaoheng didn't know how to explain it. He thought about it for a long time and finally said, "We're investigating." To be exact, he was waiting for the results of the DNA sequence comparison from Chen Lai. Yi Xian was silent for a moment, then said, "Where's little Nianji's body? Can I see her?" "She's not back yet." Hua Xiaoheng put his hands in his trouser pockets and looked like he was seeing him off. "When she comes back, I'll take you to see her." "Thank you." Yi Xian nodded at him. "I have one more request. I hope I can bury her with Uncle Gu and Auntie Gu." Hua Xiaoheng, she's Uncle Gu and Auntie Gu's daughter. She was only 12 years old when she died. She was alone at the bottom of the sea for so many years. She must miss her parents so much. Yi Xian choked up again. "I beg you, Major General Hua." This was today's chapter of 4,500 words, chapter 1457, Once Brushed Shoulders. Moi. Chapter 1469. Yi Xian's legs went weak, and he was about to kneel down to Hua Xiaoheng. Hua Xiaoheng quickly grabbed his arm and stopped him from kneeling. He nodded. I promise you that when her body is brought back, I'll bury her with her parents. Gu Xiangwen and his wife were already buried in the National Martyrs Cemetery in the imperial capital. As their underage daughter, little Nianji could also enjoy the same treatment. No matter what, little Nianji's identity was unquestionable. Yi Xian thanked Hua Xiaoheng profusely. He promised that he would ask him to come and send little Nianji off for the last time before leaving his office with peace of mind. Hua Xiaoheng asked someone to send Yi Xian out, then asked Zhao Liangzi to show the video he had just recorded to Gu Yanran. When Gu Yanran saw Hua Xiaoheng in the video, she suddenly asked Yi Xian, "Did you realize that you loved the wrong person and regret it?" Then when Yi Xian blurted out "of course," and expressed his regret, Gu Yanran was so angry that her entire body trembled. She gritted her teeth and clenched her fists tightly. Her fingers were so deep into her palms that they were bleeding. The heart-wrenching pain made her want to roar, scream, and vent, but the electronic collar around her neck restricted her movements. This feeling of rage but nowhere to vent deepened her pain. She clutched her chest and fell to the ground, crying so hard that she was about to faint. This time she deeply understood Hua Xiaoheng's vengeful style of doing things. It might have been fine under other circumstances, but once he and Yanji's relationship was provoked, he would definitely retaliate fiercely. No matter how you looked at it, he wouldn't make things easy for you. After sending Yi Xian off, Hua Xiaoheng asked Fan Jian to drive him to see Bai Jini, who was being held in prison. A year in prison had made Bai Jini even older. She was originally about the same age as Song Jining, but now she looked like Song Jining's grandmother. She had wrinkled skin and white hair and was getting old. Hua Xiaoheng sat on the chair in the reception room and calmly watched as Bai Jini walked over in handcuffs and sat down in front of him. Major General Hua? What a rare guest. Bai Jini slowly sat down and tilted her head with a smile. What can I do for you? Hua Xiaoheng looked at her and said calmly, You've been in prison for a year but it feels like 10 years. Yeah, every day feels like a year here. Bai Jini had just spoken when she suddenly realized that Hua Xiaoheng was saying she had aged 10 years in a year. He was so angry that he gritted his teeth. For a woman, even a convicted murderer would mind being called fat or old. This had nothing to do with a woman's status, situation, or treatment. It was purely instinctive. Bai Jini's expression changed immediately. She glared at Hua Xiaoheng and sneered as she stood up. Major General Hua came all the way here just to laugh at me? Forgive me for not keeping you company. Hua Xiaoheng looked at Bai Jini's old face and suddenly said, Bai Jini, 7 years ago, you went to Sea City to monitor the special magnetic field data. Who gave you the information? Bai Jini was about to turn around, but she froze when she heard this. There was no time to change the expression on her face. For a moment she struggled between anger and fear. Seeing Bai Jini like this, Hua Xiaoheng knew what was going on. As expected, the special magnetic field hadn't suddenly appeared. 7 years ago? You were still the director of the Institute of High Energy Physics in the imperial capital and hadn't left the imperial capital. How did you know that there would be a special magnetic field in Sea City at a specific time? Hua Xiaoheng threw one question after another at Bai Jini's brain, overwhelming her. Or do you have real-time monitoring of the entire Sea City, or the entire Huaxia Empire's magnetic field? Don't fool me with that kind of reason. Hua Xiaoheng's attitude became calmer. Even our military can't do this kind of technology. Although your Institute of High Energy Physics represents the highest level of physics in Huaxia Empire, it can't do it either. Because this doesn't require technology, but a huge amount of financial resources and strict execution ability. Your Institute of High Energy Physics doesn't have either of these. Hua Xiaoheng stood up and put his hands in his trouser pockets. He was calm and composed. You even specially called the military to protect me, and specifically asked me to personally go. His eyes narrowed imperceptibly. Tell me who gave you the information. Why do you insist on me protecting you? Bai Jini's heart almost jumped out of her throat when she heard this. After a while, she calmed down and tilted her body to look at Hua Xiaoheng. She said with a faint smile, No one gave me the information. I happened to observe the results myself. Happened? You're in the imperial capital. Under what circumstances do you have surveillance of the downtown area of Sea City? Hua Xiaoheng was as still as a mountain. He looked at Bai Jini quietly. Actually, it doesn't matter if you don't tell me. Hua Xiaoheng looked Bai Jini up and down, his eyes deep. From your body language just now, I can already tell that someone did give you the information. I will apply to the court for a search warrant and continue to search all your movable and immovable property. He didn't believe that a woman who was already in prison and sentenced to death could continue to hide it. He didn't expect Baijini to not be worried at all. She laughed so hard that she bent over. Fine, go and investigate. If you find it, it's on you. Baijini raised her handcuffed hands in front of her face to cover her mouth, but her laughter still came out. This reaction was a little abnormal. You've already destroyed all your sources of information? Xiaoheng instinctively made a judgment and thought deeply. That means that someone did give you the information and it was a one-time message. So, was it an email, a letter, a small note, a text message, or a phone call? Xiaoheng spoke very slowly. As he spoke, he carefully observed Baijini's expression. When Xiaoheng said email, letter, small note, and a text message, Baijini didn't comment. Her expression didn't change at all. Only when he said a phone call, Baijini couldn't help but blink. Looks like it was a phone call. Xiaoheng was deep in thought. I can go to the telecommunications department and the cell phone operator and check all your landline and cell phone call records from 7 years ago. That way it wouldn't matter even if the contents of her phone were deleted. But Baijini was still laughing. Okay, go and check. I'll say it again. If you find it, it's on you. Ha! Xiaoheng's heart skipped a beat. Baijini's fearless attitude reminded him of another phone. In that phone, it had received content that wasn't sent through the cell phone operator. He nodded slightly. I know. It should be my uncle's phone. If I remember correctly, 11 years ago that phone received a set of coordinate data. It was in C City. In that case, 7 years ago that phone should have received another message. Thank you for passing on the message. Goodbye. Xiaoheng turned around and left. Baijini was dumbfounded behind him. She hadn't said anything important. She had only laughed a few times. How had this guy pieced together her source of information? Xiaoheng was right. 11 years ago, Huo Guanyuan's phone had received a set of coordinate data for the first time. In order not to let others know that Huo Guanyuan's phone was with her, she could only secretly study it. However, after studying it for a long time in C City, she couldn't find anything, so she gave up. Until 7 years ago, the phone that had no signal at all suddenly received a call. Someone told her that at a certain time, a special magnetic field would appear somewhere in C City. They also said that they would give her a big gift as long as Xiaoheng was present. In the end, she didn't get any results other than a set of magnetic field data and a sudden car accident explosion. Of course, if that orphan girl Gu Nianji was considered a big gift, then she had been played like a monkey. So she didn't mention this call to anyone. Xiaoheng, come back. Baijini was anxious. When Xiaoheng mentioned this just now, she remembered. Seeing that Xiaoheng was so anxious and had specially come to visit the prison, she immediately knew that this information was the clue that Xiaoheng and the others desperately needed. She immediately planned to discuss it with her niece, Bai Yueran, and strive for a reduction in her sentence. In the end, Xiaoheng had guessed the source of the information immediately. How could she reduce her sentence? But Xiaoheng ignored her. His uncle Huo Guanyuan's phone was now in Song Jinning's hands. Xiaoheng only needed to borrow it from Song Jinning. As for Baijini's pretentious look, did he think he couldn't tell that she wanted to take the opportunity to reduce her sentence? Don't be too optimistic. After Xiaoheng left, Baijini was restless. She finally asked the warden to see Bai Yueran, the director of the Special Operations Legal Department. She claimed that she had important clues to report. She was following the proper channels to make a report, and the Bai family was still at the peak of power in Huaxia. The warden wouldn't, couldn't, and didn't dare to stop her. Baijini wants to see me? What did she say? Bai Yueran received a call from the warden in her office. She put down her pen and turned around in her chair. She looked at the large window in front of her and frowned. Does she still have visitation time? According to the rules, prisoners in the prison had a fixed visitation time. It was impossible to see whoever they wanted at any time. The warden looked at the rules and said, Baijini does still have visitation time left, but this time she said that she has an important clue to report and wants to reduce her sentence by doing a meritorious deed. I see. Bai Yueran pondered for a moment. Wait a moment, I'll see if I still have time. As the director of the Special Operations Legal Department, her schedule was also very busy. She looked at her schedule. There was indeed an hour of free time this afternoon. She had originally planned to hold a meeting with the legal department to discuss the work needs after the day. However, Baijini said that she had an important clue to report and wanted to reduce her sentence. This request couldn't be ignored. She could hold meetings every day, but her aunt was already sentenced to death. However, a 2-year suspension of execution could usually be commuted to life imprisonment. Bai Yueran also knew that Bai Jini had offended the Huo family. She also knew that with Huo Xiaoheng's personality and way of doing things, there was no way he would let Bai Jini off. But what if Bai Jini really reported a big clue that would benefit the country and the people? There were precedents for felons in prison to have their sentences reduced because they reported important clues. Bai Yueran hesitated for a moment, but still said to the warden on the other end of the phone, "Then it's 4 o'clock today. Is it convenient for you?" "Yes." "Then I'll tell her. 4 o'clock in the afternoon." The warden made an appointment and politely said to Bai Yueran, "See you in the afternoon." Then he hung up. Bai Yueran couldn't continue working. She packed her things and got up to look for her father, Bai Jianqing. Her father was now the prime minister of the Wuxia Empire. Although she was his daughter, she couldn't see the prime minister of a country whenever she wanted. It was impossible for her to be like the daughter of a certain country's president, who could sit in his Oval Office and meet foreign guests with him. Even when the Wuxia Empire had an emperor, there wasn't such a tradition. She still waited outside the door obediently and waited for 15 minutes for her father to have afternoon tea. "Yueran, why are you free to look for me at this hour?" Bai Jianqing smiled and pushed a plate of vanilla French cake in front of Bai Yueran. He said kindly, "Eat it, this is your favorite cake." Bai Yueran reached out to pick up a piece and ate it in small bites. After eating, she whispered, "Auntie just got someone to call me." She said she had important news to report and wanted to do a meritorious deed to reduce her sentence. When Bai Jianqing heard that it was news about Bai Jini, he immediately frowned. What other important news could she have? She's not trying to trick you into pleading for mercy and commuting her sentence, is she? Bai Yueran thought that was most likely the reason. But what if Bai Jini really thought of some great clues? That was also possible. Bai Yueran was a lawyer and she was also a very good lawyer. She never let go of any useful clues. I'd better make a trip. It's not a big deal for me to visit her. Apart from work, Bai Yueran was also Bai Jini's family. They couldn't deliberately alienate her just because she was now a prisoner. If they did this, ordinary people wouldn't think that they were deliberately avoiding suspicion. Instead, they would think that they were inhumane. An inhumane label wasn't a good thing for a prime minister who came to power through an election. Bai Yueran stood up and said cautiously, "If there's anything, I'll report it to you immediately." Bai Jianqing thought about it for a moment and agreed. "Okay, no matter what, she's your aunt. It's only right for me to send her off on her last journey." Bai Yueran nodded and left Bai Jianqing's office to go to the prison where Bai Jini was being held. Bai Jini didn't expect Bai Yueran to agree to see her immediately, and her heart was filled with mixed feelings. She had thought that ever since her brother was elected prime minister, he would draw a clear line between them. So in the past year she hadn't made any requests, and she didn't dare remind anyone that Bai Jianqing had a sister like her, a felon. Although this matter had already been used by Bai Jianqing's political enemies during the election, it was better to avoid it if possible. She waited anxiously in the prison visiting room. When she saw Bai Yueran walk in valiantly, Bai Jini stood up excitedly. "Yueran. Long time no see." Bai Yueran glanced at Bai Jini, pulled out a chair and sat down. She also said to Bai Jini, "Please sit." Bai Jini sat down as well and rested her arms on the long table in front of her. She leaned forward slightly and carefully looked at her niece's beautiful face. At the same time, she found that her left hand was still empty. There wasn't even a ring. "Yueran, you're not married yet?" Bai Jini frowned. "You're not young anymore, are you?" This was today's chapter of 4,200 words, chapter 1458, Hoarding Rare Goods. Moi. Chapter 1470. Bai Jini's words were really touching on a sore spot. Bai Yueran felt slightly embarrassed and retracted her hand to place it on the armrest beside her. She said calmly, "Auntie, you said you have important clues to report? I'm on a tight schedule. I only have 40 minutes left." It had taken her 20 minutes to drive over, so she only had an hour's free time. Bai Jini was dragging her feet, so it would be over quickly. Bai Jini composed herself and had no choice but to stop the awkward small talk. She lowered her voice nervously. "Yueran, I don't know if this information will help me reduce my sentence, but I know that Huo Xiaoheng is anxiously looking for this information." Bai Yueran raised her eyebrows in surprise. "What information? How do you know that Huo Xiao is looking for this information?" Gu Nianji was missing, and Hua Xiaoheng was looking for her all over the world. Did Bai Jini know about her? That couldn't be. If that was the case, then this prison also needed to be properly investigated. However, Bai Jini quickly dispelled her doubts. Hua Xiaoheng just came to see me specifically to ask about this. He came to see you specifically? Bai Yueran's brows furrowed even more. Could it really be news related to Gu Nianji? She looked at Bai Jini suspiciously. But how did you know? As a felon, Bai Jini had been locked up for a year, and Gu Nianji's disappearance had only happened half a month ago. How did Bai Jini know about this? Of course, Bai Jini didn't know that Gu Nianji was missing. She quickly said, "It's about 7 years ago when I went to Sea City to monitor the magnetic field." 7 years ago? Bai Yueran's brows furrowed slightly as she remembered. Was it that time to monitor the magnetic field data, when a car suddenly broke into, and then the car exploded? Yes. Bai Jini quickly nodded and leaned forward, almost to Bai Yueran's ear. She frowned and complained, "It was that time they said they were going to give me a big gift, but in the end they only sent a little orphan girl that no one wanted. I didn't want to be a free babysitter, so I didn't say anything." And what made Bai Jini even more displeased was that this little orphan girl that no one wanted had actually sent her to prison 6 years later. She gritted her teeth in hatred just thinking about it. So big gift my ass. It was like a talisman sent to hasten his death. If she hadn't been greedy for shortcuts and was in a hurry to get results, she wouldn't have been lured by others and spent so much effort to monitor the magnetic field. In the end she was fooled. Bai Jini grumbled to express her deep-seated hatred for Gu Nianji. What? Bai Yueran vaguely felt that something was amiss. Can you say that again? What do you mean by a big present? Didn't you say that you suddenly observed a special magnetic field? Bai Jini ran her fingers through her hair in embarrassment, her wrinkled face flushed with embarrassment. She stammered, "That's not important. What's important is that my phone, no, I should say Guan Yuan's phone, received a call 7 years ago." That's not important? Bai Yueran's frown deepened. How can that not be important? However, she hesitated. Gu Nianji's case was a secret mission for the Special Operations Forces, and there were many things that needed to be kept secret. Bai Jini did not have the appropriate security clearance, so she did not know many things. For example, the airplane engine blueprint in Gu Nianji's backpack was 50 years more advanced than the world's most advanced engine. Also, Gu Nianji had suddenly been kidnapped and disappeared. Thinking about it carefully, her disappearance was as sudden as her arrival. Could there be a connection between the two? Bai Yueran quietly turned on the record button on her phone and continued Bai Jini's words. "Auntie, you said that Hua Xiao's uncle, Colonel Hua Guanyuan's phone, received a call 7 years ago? I remember that last time, you didn't say anything? And there shouldn't be any call records on the phone, right?" "No." Bai Jini shook her head and continued to speak in Bai Yueran's ear. The only thing they could find was the text message that was saved on the phone 11 years ago. This call didn't leave any trace on the phone after it was made. As long as I don't say anything, Hua Xiaoheng can't know anything. A year ago, Bai Yueran had listened to Bai Jini's case from beginning to end. She remembered that Bai Jini had killed Luo Xingxue to take this phone. If she guessed correctly, this phone was probably not found by the phone operator. So as long as Bai Jini didn't say anything, Hua Xiaoheng really couldn't know anything about it. Bai Yueran intuitively felt that this information would be very helpful to Hua Xiaoheng in his search for Gu Nianji. Therefore, she deliberately led Bai Jini to say the contents of the call. Bai Yueran discreetly moved the phone very close to Bai Jini. She smiled at Bai Jini, reassuring her not to be nervous. Then she asked, "Really? Is this what you want to use to reduce your sentence? But it also depends on what the information is. If it's not a particularly important clue, it's not easy to get a reduction in sentence." Bai Jini was a little anxious, but still remembered to keep her voice very low. "Then can you help me plead again? I can tell you about that phone call." Because she knew that there were surveillance cameras in this house, she didn't want to be recorded by the surveillance cameras, so she spoke very softly and whispered into Bai Yueran's ear. However, she didn't expect that Bai Yueran was already recording them. Bai Jini completely trusted her niece, Bai Yueran, and she could only trust her. As a prisoner on death row with a reprieve, she actually had no bargaining chips in her hands. If Hua Xiaoheng hadn't suddenly asked her if she had hidden any information 7 years ago, she would have completely forgotten about this humiliating phone call. Actually, until now she was just gambling on her psychological state. It would be good if it succeeded, but if it didn't, could it be worse? Anyway, she had already been sentenced to death. After a year in prison, Bai Jini had already resigned herself to her fate. It was Hua Xiaoheng's sudden visit that reignited her hope of survival. Bai Yueran didn't bat an eyelid and said patiently, "Okay, can you tell me in detail what that phone call was about? Who called? What about the phone number? Do you still remember?" Bai Jini sighed. "I don't know who called me. The phone number was also very strange. I tried to check it before but it was an invalid number." Bai Yueran, the caller was really cautious. Bai Yueran could only ask again, "Then what was the content of the call?" Bai Jini's voice became even softer. "The person on the phone was a man. I've never heard his voice before. He seemed to be very anxious and only called for less than a minute. He spoke very quickly and hurriedly told me the time and place. Then he said that if I brought Hua Xiaoheng with me at this time and place, he would give me a big gift. In the end, big gift my ass. He's a complete liar." Bai Yueran. "He even mentioned Major General Hua's name?" Bai Yueran was surprised. "That person knows Major General Hua? I'm 80% sure." Bai Jini was secretive and almost leaned on Bai Yueran's shoulder. "Do you think this clue is enough to reduce his sentence? You don't know him. Why would he call you?" Bai Yueran continued to interrogate without batting an eyelid. "Is he someone who used to admire you?" Her aunt had been very popular with men when she was young, but unfortunately the person she loved didn't love her. Bai Yueran's heart sank. She secretly wondered if the women of the Bai family were all like this. She didn't like the person she liked. The person she liked didn't like her. Bai Shuang was the only exception, but when the person she liked also liked her, she was already dead. Bai Jini blushed again when she heard Bai Yueran's words. She then shook her head and said embarrassedly, "Of course not, you're thinking too much." Bai Yueran asked a few more questions in a different direction. Seeing that Bai Jini couldn't think of anything new, she pressed pause on the recording on her phone and said calmly, "I'll discuss it with the judge. Auntie, are there any other clues?" Hua Xiaoheng should be looking for this clue. Bai Jini spread her hands. "If this clue doesn't work, I can only wait for death." She looked at Bai Yueran pitifully. Bai Yueran couldn't bear it. However, she still looked away and said calmly, "Don't worry, I'll do my best." She still planned to put in a good word for Bai Jini in front of Hua Xiaoheng. If this clue could help Hua Xiaoheng find Gun Yanji, Bai Jini might really be able to reduce her sentence. Bai Yueran left the prison and returned to the Special Operations Forces headquarters base. She immediately went to look for Hua Xiaoheng. However, Hua Xiaoheng wasn't in the office. "Little Zay, where's Hua Xiao?" Bai Yueran walked to Zhao Liang's desk and knocked with a smile. Zhao Liangzi looked up at her and said calmly, "Hua Xiao went out." "What's the matter, Director Bai?" Bai Yueran sat down in front of him and asked carefully, "Little Zay, are you still angry at me? You've been angry for so long, is it time to get over it?" "No, I'm not angry at you." Zhao Liangzi looked away and looked at the computer screen in front of him. "If Director Bai doesn't have anything else to say, please wait outside. This is the office, not the reception room." Bai Yueran? She looked at Zhao Liangzi quietly for a while. Today he was wearing a summer uniform. The tailored military uniform was perfectly fitted to his body, and even the sleeves were straightened into a straight line. In the past, his fair and elegant face had been tanned because of the mission. However, in just a few months after returning, he had regained his fair complexion. However, there was also a hint of valiance to him. His temperament had completely settled down, and he was more masculine than before. He was more mature and reserved. If Zhao Liangzi had been like this 2 years ago, Bai Yueran knew that she would have immediately agreed to his pursuit. But now, he had become a better him and she had become the one pursuing him. Bai Yueran was slightly dazed and said, "I have something important to report to Hua Xiao. If you know where he is, please let me know." "Something important? What is it?" Zhao Liangzi looked up at her. "It's fine to tell you." Hua Xiaoheng went to the hospital building to see the patient. Bai Yueran understood immediately. Hua Xiao went to visit Xiao Yi? Zhao Liangzi didn't comment. Bai Yueran stood up and whispered, "Then I'll go find Hua Xiao. Take care." When she reached the door, she turned back and said, "Goodbye." Zhao Liangzi didn't even look up. He was focused on his work. The hospital building at the headquarters of the Special Operations Forces wasn't far from the office building. Chenlai worked there. Xiao Yi was a key patient that Chenlai had recently received. By the time Bai Yueran hurried over, it was already evening. It was early September. Although the lawn in front of the hospital building was still green, it was a little more bleak than autumn. The afterglow of the setting sun was yellow, like a blanket covering the lawn. Bai Yueran stood on the opposite side of the lawn. She looked up and saw Hua Xiaoheng pushing a wheelchair and walking slowly on the tree-lined path beside the lawn. Sitting in the wheelchair was a beautiful girl with short, neat hair and a white striped hospital gown. It was Xiao Yi. Xiao Ye's limbs had been broken by the gangster with a gun to protect Gun Yanji. She had fainted in a pool of blood. She had already woken up. Chen Lai's medical skills were brilliant. He had healed her arms and legs. However, the tendons in her left hand had been broken, and it hadn't healed very well. Her leg was also recovering, but the wound was too big and she still couldn't walk. At this moment, Xiao Yi was expressionless. She was nestled in the wheelchair and quietly looking ahead. Bai Yueran stood opposite and watched for a while before sighing and walking over. Major General Hua. She nodded with a smile and said to Xiao Yi, are you feeling better? Xiao Yi looked up at Bai Yueran. Her eyes were a little dazed as she nodded slowly. Okay. Hua Xiaoheng knew that Bai Yueran wouldn't come to the temple for no reason, so he looked at her inquisitively. Bai Yueran immediately said, Major General Hua, there's something I want to report to you. Xiao Yi came back to her senses and quickly said, Go ahead. I'll go back first. She pressed the button on her wheelchair, turned around and went back to the hospital building. Hua Xiaoheng was worried, so he called the nurse over to push Xiao Yi away. Looking at Xiao Ye's back in the wheelchair, Bai Yueran's heart felt slightly stifled. She whispered, Major General Hua, what will Xiao Yi do in the future? Will she change jobs? I respect her decision. Hua Xiaoheng didn't want to talk about Xiao Yi. He looked away and calmly looked at Bai Yueran. He asked, Why is Director Bai looking for me? Bai Yueran looked around. It was dusk, and the sunset glow gradually dissipated from the horizon. The tree-lined path was quiet, and there was no one coming or going. She said in a low voice, I just went to see my aunt. Hua Xiaoheng's sharp eyes narrowed. You just went to see Bai Genie? What? Bai Yueran said frankly, It was my aunt who looked for me. She said she wanted to redeem herself. Hua Xiaoheng smiled. If you want to plead on behalf of your aunt, you can save some effort. I'm very busy. With that he walked away. Major General Hua. Bai Yueran hurriedly called out to him from behind. Aunt told me about the important clues and I recorded them all. I didn't mean to plead on behalf of my aunt. I just wanted to let you hear it. It might be useful in finding Miss Gu. Hua Xiaoheng immediately stopped in his tracks and turned to look at her. You recorded what your aunt said? Bai Yueran nodded. Hua Xiaoheng immediately brought her back to his office. Zhao Liangzi was a little surprised to see Bai Yueran follow Hua Xiaoheng in, but he didn't say anything. He helped them close the office door. In Hua Xiaoheng's single office, Bai Yueran sat in front of him. She turned on the recording on her phone and played it to Hua Xiaoheng. This is today's chapter of 4,200 words, chapter 1459, Let You Know a Secret. Thank you for your recommendation votes and monthly votes. Mwah. Chapter 1471. Bai Genie's slightly old and hoarse voice came from the phone. I don't know who called me. The phone number is also very strange. I tried to check it before, but it's an invalid number. The person who called was a man. I've never heard his voice before. He seemed to be in a hurry and only called for less than a minute. He spoke very quickly and hurriedly told me the time and place. Then he said that if I brought Hua Xiaoheng with me at this time and place, he would give me a big gift. And the result? Big gift my ass. He's a complete liar. Hua Xiaoheng's heart skipped a beat when he heard this, but his expression remained calm. He smiled and said calmly, Thank you, Director Bai. This clue is indeed very important. However, Bai Genie's concealment has indeed caused a lot of trouble and damage to our work. Bai Yueran understood what Hua Xiaoheng meant. She lowered her voice and said, Major General Hua, I really have no intention of pleading for my aunt. I just want to tell you that she knows this clue. As for the fact that she didn't report it 7 years ago, it's also a fact. I won't plead for her. She sent the recording to Hua Xiaoheng. You can study it yourself. I'll go back first. Hua Xiaoheng looked at Bai Yueran's lonely back as she turned around and said sincerely, Thank you, Director Bai. Bai Yueran didn't turn around and waved her hand casually. Major General Hua, you're welcome. This is my duty. She had selfish motives. She wanted to protect the Bai family's reputation and the family's overall interests, but she had never made a mistake in her work. Moreover, to her, the country's interests were definitely before the Bai family's. Perhaps in the eyes of some people she couldn't be completely selfless, nor could she care and protect her family regardless of their gains and losses. She might even be a little unreasonable, but she didn't want to change her ways. She had her own sense of what she should and shouldn't do. Hua Xiaoheng silently shifted his gaze to his phone. Bai Yueran had just sent all the contents of Bai Jini's conversation to his phone. Bai Jini's voice was very, very low. With such a low voice, the surveillance system in the visiting room probably wouldn't be able to record this conversation. So Bai Yueran had really done him a great favor. Hua Xiaoheng's brows furrowed slightly. He transferred the conversation to the computer and used the audio system to analyze for tampering and editing before amplifying it so he could hear it more clearly. Alone in his office, he listened to the recording over and over again and gradually came up with a few clues. 7 years ago he had saved Nianji. It was the result of a meticulous plot. It was not a coincidence. As for Nianji's memory loss, he didn't know if the other party had done it on purpose, or if it had been an accident, or if she had lost her memory to begin with. However, he could be sure of one thing. As soon as Nianji came to his side, he lost contact with her. That was because they had spent 6 years without finding any clues. The only clue that surfaced was when He Zhichu came to Nianji's side a year ago. It looked like He Zhichu was the key to the problem. Hua Xiaoheng's frown deepened. Was the invalid number that had been called to Bai Jini the same as the 2 invalid numbers that they had encountered later? However, Bai Jini definitely wouldn't say it directly. This was her trump card that she wanted to hang up and sell. After careful consideration, Hua Xiaoheng didn't plan to let her have her way. In fact, even if this invalid number was the same as the previous 2, it would be useless. Because with their current technology, they couldn't investigate this invalid number at all. Moreover, after thinking about it, he still believed that there were 2 groups of people behind this living Gu Nianji. One group had no ill intentions towards her, and the other group wanted nothing more than to kill her. The person who had sent the text message to Xiao Ye's mother must have wanted nothing more than to kill her. However, the people who had kidnapped her this time should be the group that had no ill intentions towards her. Even so, Hua Xiaoheng still felt uneasy. He was used to having her under his wing. This woman could have no parents or friends, but she couldn't live without him. He also didn't feel at ease leaving her in anyone's hands. But now she was nowhere to be found. Hua Xiaoheng walked out of the office with a heavy heart. He said expressionlessly to Zhao Liangzi, who was outside the door, "I'm going to the Institute of High Energy Physics. You're in charge of everything here." Zhao Liangzi looked at him worriedly. He felt that Hua Xiaoheng's mental state wasn't right. In his opinion, Hua Xiaoheng should be very sad, very angry and very desperate, just like how he had watched Bai Shuang die in front of him. However, Hua Xiaoheng's expression didn't change at all. He kept working and was as comfortable as before. Although he was also constantly looking for Gu Nianji, he didn't neglect the entire Special Operations Forces and the military. No matter how capable Hua Xiaoheng was, he was still human. Although they were soldiers and had a much higher ability to endure hardships than ordinary people, it didn't mean that they were made of steel and couldn't feel pain. If he couldn't find Gu Nianji after suppressing himself like this, Zhao Liangzi didn't dare to imagine the consequences. However, looking at Hua Xiaoheng's tall and determined back, he could only say, "Yes, sir." Hua Xiaoheng came out of his office and asked Fan Jian to drive him to the Institute of High Energy Physics. Firstly, he wanted to study Hua Guanyuan's phone again. Secondly, he wanted to see the results of Qin Lai's full series of DNA comparisons. After they got off the plane, Qin Lai rushed into the Institute of High Energy Physics and worked with Song Jining and used the quantum computer to perform large-scale calculations. He didn't return to the Special Operations Forces headquarters at all. It was already dark when they arrived at the entrance of the Institute of High Energy Physics. Hua Xiaoheng got out of the car and leaned against the car door to smoke a cigarette before walking in. Song Jining was eating dinner in her office while looking at the data on the computer. When she saw Hua Xiaoheng come in, she quickly asked, "You're here. Have you had dinner?" Hua Xiaoheng wasn't hungry at first, but when he saw the 2 dishes and soup on Song Jining's desk, he suddenly felt a little hungry. He shook his head. "Not yet. Do you have anything to eat here? Let's go to the cafeteria. Our cafeteria here is pretty good." Song Jining cleaned up the bowls, chopsticks and spoons on the table and stood up with her meal card. Hua Xiaoheng? He had almost forgotten that Song Jining didn't know how to cook either. The 2 dishes and soup on the table were obviously bought from the cafeteria. He didn't say anything and quietly followed Song Jining out of the office. His mind was still thinking about the discoveries and doubts he had made over the past few days. All the clues were arranged into a network in his mind. He only needed to wait for one result, which was the comparison results of Qin Lai's DNA sequence. Then, he would be able to find the path he should take in the maze-like network. The two of them walked out of the laboratory building. Not long after, they arrived at the cafeteria of the Institute of High-Energy Physics. It was only around 6:30 p.m., and it was the busiest time in the cafeteria. People came and went, and the lights were brightly lit. The air was filled with the unique aroma of the food in the cafeteria. There was a sense of beauty and warmth in the world. Hua Xiaoheng and Song Jining walked in. Director Song brought his son here for dinner? People who were familiar with Song Jining greeted her with a smile. Song Jining nodded with a smile. Yes, he's too busy and didn't even have time for dinner. I accompanied him to get another meal. Hua Xiaoheng had his hands in his trouser pockets. It was obvious that he was distracted. He only nodded casually and followed Song Jining to buy 2 dishes and a soup. He placed them in a food box that could be taken away. The two of them returned to Song Jining's office. Hua Xiaoheng sat in front of Song Jining's desk and began to eat dinner. It was rare for the mother and son to eat together like this. Song Jining looked at Hua Xiaoheng carefully and suddenly said, "You've lost a lot of weight recently. Although you're busy with work, you have to take care of your health." When Hua Xiaoheng wasn't on a mission, his eating schedule was very regular. In his official residence, he had to eat a steak every meal, as well as all kinds of high-protein and nutritious meals. However, during this period of time he was indeed hungry and full. He couldn't eat and he didn't feel anything when he ate. Hua Xiaoheng paused and grunted. He quickly finished everything on the plate. After cleaning up the dishes, he said to Song Jining, "Uncle's phone is still with you, right?" Song Jining looked at him strangely. "Yes, what's wrong? Why do you want his phone?" "I want to take a look." He told Song Jining what Bai Genie had said and finally asked, "Do you think there's a way to find out where the phone call from 7 years ago came from?" Song Jining's expression was very cautious. She frowned and thought for a moment, then said, "It's hard to say. If the phone operator can't find out where that number came from, then only the quantum communicator has the ability." Hua Xiaoheng looked up in surprise. "Quantum communicator? Doesn't Gu Xiangwen have a broken quantum communicator?" Song Jining nodded. "Yes, I don't have the ability to fix it. Didn't Yanji say that she wanted to study it properly?" Song Jining was filled with regret for accidentally mentioning Gu Yanji. She quickly glanced at Hua Xiaoheng. Hua Xiaoheng had already fallen silent. He said, "It should be at Yanji's house. I'll bring it over for you to study." "I really don't have that ability," Song Jining told the truth. Song Jining told the truth. "Look, the quantum computer we worked so hard to create is only a prototype. How can we repair a more advanced quantum communicator? Even you don't have such great ability. Then Gu Xiangwen, how did he research it?" Hua Xiaoheng was puzzled. Song Jining shook her head. "I don't know either, but I'm about to unlock that music box. Why don't I give you the phone and you can study it yourself? I'll see if I can unlock Gu Xiangwen's music box as soon as possible." That music box was the one Hua Xiaoheng and the others had found in Gu Xiangwen's Sirius I submarine. It was found in the submarine. According to Gu Xiangwen's holographic last words, it contained his greatest research results. "Okay, I'll take a look at that phone." Hua Xiaoheng agreed. He took his uncle Hua Guanyuan's phone from Song Jining. This is the first update of the day, Chapter 1460, Where is the Person? Thank you for your recommendation votes and monthly votes. Originally he was still working overtime today, but when he saw that the monthly vote was actually 6,000, he went home and worked hard to update the second update. There were 6,000 monthly votes at 8 p.m. Mwah. Chapter 1472. This phone was an old model from more than 10 years ago. It couldn't even be considered a smartphone. The only advanced thing was the phone battery inside. Hua Xiaoheng held it in his hand and began to check the programs and contents stored inside. Song Jining went to her laboratory to continue solving the various sets of questions and equations left behind by Gu Xiangwen. The process of opening the music box was a pure test of one's intelligence. There were no shortcuts that could be taken. When people were immersed in their work, time passed very quickly. It was midnight in the blink of an eye. Hua Xiaoheng withdrew his thoughts from the program on his phone and sighed helplessly. No, he didn't find any clues. Bai Yueran's recording of Bai Genie's whisper still didn't have any evidence to support it. A confession that couldn't be supported by evidence could only be considered a clue. Although Hua Xiaoheng really wanted to believe her, he still maintained a cautious attitude because he couldn't find any circumstantial evidence. He sat on the sofa in Song Jining's office with one hand on the back of the sofa and the other supporting his head. He looked out the window at the night sky in a daze. He seemed to be thinking about 1,000 things, but also seemed to be thinking about nothing. He sat for a while, couldn't resist the urge to sleep, and took a nap on the sofa. When he woke up, he found that the sky outside was already bright. He looked at his watch. It was already 5:50 in the morning. No wonder it was almost dawn. The sofa was a little small. He had been on it all night and his legs were numb. He stood up and was about to go out for a walk when he suddenly heard his phone ring. He took it out and saw that it was Song Jinning's number. "Miss Song?" Song Jinning's voice was unexpectedly excited. "Xiaoheng, I solved the password to the music box. I saw Gu Xiangwen's most important research result." Xiaoheng's heart skipped a beat. "Where are you?" "I'm in the lab. Do you want to come and take a look?" Xiaoheng quickly left Song Jinning's office and passed through the heavily guarded security check. He finally arrived at the door of her lab and rang the doorbell. Song Jinning pressed the button. The lab was soundproof and shockproof. The door that could even resist missiles quietly opened to both sides. Xiaoheng quickly glanced at the postmodern decoration of the lab and the various experimental platforms. There was a huge oil painting on the wall opposite the laboratory. It was a long instrument that looked like a crystal chandelier that was as tall as a 3-story building. This was the prototype of the quantum computer that the Institute of High-Energy Physics had commissioned the military to build. This kind of instrument had extremely high requirements for the environment and energy. Until now, it could only be stored in the special underground laboratory of this laboratory building. It was just an oil painting upstairs, but it was already shocking enough. Song Jinning was wearing a white coat and standing in front of an experimental platform. She waved at him. "Close the door and come here quickly. I'll show you this." She held the black music box in her hands, her face flushed with excitement. Xiaoheng walked over. "What exactly is it?" Song Jinning held up a flash drive. "See this? It's all in here." She inserted the flash drive into the computer, entered the password she had cracked, and found a set of design drawings in the flash drive. Song Jinning opened the blueprint file. "What is this?" Xiaoheng asked calmly. "From the shape, it looks like a quantum communicator." "Gu Xiangwen's most important research result is this quantum communicator," Song Jinning said very cautiously. He explained at the end of the blueprint that he had been inspired by someone a long time ago and had the idea of building a quantum communicator. However, after many years, there had been a technical bottleneck that had not been broken through, so the quantum communicator that he built was only a semi-finished product and could not communicate. It wasn't until he was trapped at the bottom of the sea because of a submarine accident that he suddenly thought of the key to the problem. However, he no longer had time to complete his research and development, so he could only leave behind this set of improved design drawings. Xiaoheng's heart skipped a beat. "So the quantum communicator we found isn't actually broken, but it hasn't been successfully developed at all?" "Yes, it's only a semi-finished product, so it can't be used. I thought it was broken. As expected, I can't express my opinion on something I haven't touched before." Song Jinning was very emotional. "This design drawing is really amazing. It's simply enlightening and enlightening. For example, using that quantum communicator, not only can it disguise a normal number as an invalid number, but it can also use quantum theory to achieve real-time communication between two phones. It can also achieve multidimensional, omnidirectional, and time-limited communication. This is the most special part of the quantum communicator." Xiaoheng suddenly understood something. If quantum theory can really be used in the macroscopic world, it will revolutionize our world. Song Jinning was even more regretful. What a pity that such a talented scientist died so early. If he were still alive, his contribution to the entire human race would be incalculable. However, such a powerful person couldn't save his beloved daughter's life. Xiaoheng sighed silently in his heart. Looking at the design drawing and thinking of the unfinished quantum communicator with Gunyanji, Xiaoheng said, "I'll give you that quantum communicator. Can you complete its invention?" "I'm afraid I can't help." Song Jinning unplugged the flash drive regretfully and put it back into the music box. Then she closed the music box according to the original procedure. She continued, "I can't help much because this isn't my main research direction. It's not even a field I'm familiar with. There were too few scientists like Gu Xiangwen who were almost all-round. With Song Jinning's high intelligence, she could only be outstanding in certain areas. It was impossible for her to be like Gu Xiangwen, who could cross the three major fields of physics, medicine and biology with ease. However, this design drawing wasn't completely useless for Song Jinning. This was because this design drawing was about how to use quantum theory to create related instruments. In this regard, they could understand everything. Therefore, this design drawing was also a great inspiration for Song Jinning's research in her main field. She was originally a big shot at studying high-energy magnetic fields. 17 years ago, the military and their Institute of High-Energy Physics experiment was related to super-strong magnetic fields. Our experiment has recently reached a bottleneck and hasn't made any progress. But this design drawing has given me a new direction. I think our experimental equipment can be changed. And most importantly, the magnetic field data I've obtained recently has allowed me to improve my understanding of high-energy magnetic fields. In his design drawing, how to allow the quantum communicator to obtain energy from the electric field is very original and very effective. Last time in the Sea of Japan, Nianji helped me realize the transformation from a super-strong magnetic field to an electric field. It showed me how much potential power a super-strong magnetic field has when it transforms energy. There's also the high-energy magnetic field data that Gu Xiangwen left for your uncle, as well as the abnormal magnetic field fluctuations that appeared near the sinkhole in the Tunguska region of Russia in the first half of the year. They all made me think of how to obtain the high-energy magnetic field needed for the experiment. Song Jinning's eyes lit up. I think our experiment is just around the corner. Hua Xiaoheng. He realized that he didn't care at all about whether the military and the Institute of High-Energy Physics experiment would succeed. He only wanted to find Gu Nianji now. He only wanted to see her by his side so that his heart could truly calm down. Hua Xiaoheng had never interfered with Song Jinning's work in life, nor would he interfere with her research. But this time he made an exception and said, "Miss Song, can you put aside your experiment for now and help us find Nianji's whereabouts?" Song Jinning stopped her excited thoughts and looked at Hua Xiaoheng. Her heart skipped a beat. This was her son, a son who was unmoved by anything. This was the first time he had asked her to help him find his beloved girl. She really wasn't a good mother. Song Jinning patted his shoulder. "Okay, I'll help you." She then asked, "What can I help you with?" Hua Xiaoheng. What Hua Xiaoheng hoped the most was that Song Jinning could complete the design and manufacture of the quantum communicator so that it could be used. However, Song Jinning had already made it clear that she couldn't do it. Hua Xiaoheng didn't force her. He thought about it for a moment and said, "I haven't thought about it yet, but when Nianji disappeared we found some related surveillance videos. Can you help me do a technical analysis of those surveillance videos?" Of course, it's a higher level of technical analysis. The Special Operations Forces could do the general technical analysis themselves. However, for a higher level of technical analysis, they needed the amazing people from the Institute of High-Energy Physics. No problem. Song Jinning quickly agreed. "Send me the surveillance videos. I'll help you do the technical analysis." This is today's second monthly vote, 6,000 plus updates. Chapter 1461, Breaking Through the Bottleneck. Thank you for your recommendation votes and monthly votes. Mwah. Chapter 1473. Thank you, Miss Song. Hua Xiaoheng was truly exhausted, so much so that he had no choice but to ask for help from Song Jinning, who had nothing to do with their work. This was the first time in his career that he had ever experienced something like this. Song Jinning was very worried about his physical condition, but she still said, "I will do my best to help you, but you have to be mentally prepared. Professionals do professional things. I'm not good at finding people." She was also worried about Gu Nianji's whereabouts, but this wasn't something she was good at, so she wisely didn't criticize Hua Xiaoheng's work to avoid affecting their normal work. Hua Xiaoheng also knew this, but he really had no other choice. It was obvious that the other party's technology was more advanced than theirs, and it was premeditated. They had prepared for such a long time, like casting a net. If he did not think of another way, then he really had no chance of winning. He explained the procedures and goals of their work to Song Jinning and discussed the follow-up. He then called Zhao Liangzi and asked him to send him the surveillance footage related to Gu Nianji's disappearance. After Song Jinning received all the surveillance videos, she immediately began to analyze the data. Hua Xiaoheng bid farewell and prepared to leave her lab. As soon as he opened the door, he saw a chubby man in a white coat standing at the door, about to press the doorbell. "Mr. Hua, why are you here?" The person standing in front of Song Jinning's laboratory was actually Chen Lai. Hua Xiaoheng was also very surprised. "Weren't you doing a DNA comparison? It should be in the underground laboratory, right? Because the quantum computer is underground." Chen Lai narrowed his eyes and smiled absent-mindedly. "Of course. Damn it, I'm so tired. Now all I see are numbers and you're just like data, ha ha ha. He stepped aside. Chinlai walked in and looked around. Where's Director Song? Why are you here? After working with the quantum computer for more than 2 days, Chinlai was a little dizzy. He rubbed his eyes and looked around. He was extremely excited and even trembling. Wu Xiaoheng thought for a moment. Let's go out first. Let's not disturb Miss Song's work. He gently closed the lab door and left the Institute of High Energy Physics with Chinlai. By the time the two of them returned to the office building of the headquarters of the Special Operations Forces, it was already dawn. The September sun brought with it the heat of late summer. Although it was only early in the morning, it already had some power. Wu Xiaoheng closed the door to his office and looked at Chinlai. His expression was still calm, but his voice was a little shaky. The results are out? Chinlai's round eyes narrowed into slits as he smiled. We're out. Wu Xiaoheng looked at him calmly. Why are you so agitated? Chinlai leaned forward and said mysteriously, Beg me. Beg me and I'll tell you. Wu Xiaoheng closed his eyes speechlessly and said dryly, Chinlai, Nianji is waiting for us to save her. Why are you still keeping us in suspense? Ask your own conscience. It will hurt. Chinlai rubbed his chest, his expression pained and conflicted. I'm in such a good mood and so excited. I've really let Nianji down. My conscience really hurts. The corners of Wu Xiaoheng's mouth twitched. He sat down on the sofa across from him and said calmly, If you hadn't laughed so hard that I couldn't see your eyes, I might have believed you. Chinlai didn't want to laugh, but he couldn't suppress the smile on his face. Wu Xiao, my conscience really hurts. Believe me. I don't believe you. Wu Xiaoheng stretched his long legs and crossed his arms. He was calm and composed. Hurry up and tell me, or I'll let you have a taste of the iron fist of the people's dictatorship. Wu Xiaoheng's deterrence was still somewhat effective. Chinlai took a deep breath and finally calmed down. He said, I spent 2 days and 1 night using a quantum computer to finally compare the 6 billion base pairs of the 2 sets of DNA in order. Wu Xiaoheng listened attentively. He turned on his phone and pointed it at Chinlai to record the video. Chinlai rambled on. Do you know, I've never seen such a situation before. I first compared the DNA base pair sequence of Hijichu and the 16-year-old boy, Chinlai said as he took out a flash drive from his pocket. I'll show you. The computer in Wu Xiaoheng's office was connected to the big screen on the wall. Chinlai walked to the back of the computer and plugged in the flash drive. Opening the file in the flash drive, Chinlai beamed with joy. Look, this is the DNA of the boy who died at the age of 16. We can call him Little Hijichu. This is the DNA base pair sequence of Big Hijichu, which is also Professor He. From the comparison of all the base pairs, I found that their DNA base pairs are almost exactly the same. Yes, you heard me right. I said almost. It's not exactly the same as what we thought before. Wu Xiaoheng remained calm, but he still heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. It finally proved that the two of them were not the same person. As long as the DNA was different, they could never be the same person. But where are the differences? Chinlai pointed at Wu Xiaoheng with the mouse. Look, this is the place where the young Hijichu's DNA mutated. There are a total of 8 nodes. This proves that what the nanny said was true. The young Hijichu is indeed sick, and it's a disease that won't last long. These DNA mutations directly limit his hematopoietic function. In other words, he really has a very serious congenital disease. Look here again. This is Professor He's DNA sequence. Look at the corresponding 8 nodes here. They're completely healthy and normal. There's no mutation at all. So the bases in these 8 places in Professor He's DNA are completely different from the young Hijichu's. This also proves that their DNA sequences are not exactly the same. Chinlai was so excited that his face turned red. Let's look at the results of our Nianji and little Nianji's DNA comparison. It's even more amazing. He deliberately used our Nianji and little Nianji to distinguish the two of them. Little Nianji was the 12-year-old girl who died in the submarine in the Caribbean Sea's Blue Hole 7 years ago. Our Nianji was, of course, the beautiful 19-year-old girl who grew up by their side and was now missing. The situation is very similar to Hijichu's. The DNA of the two of them is almost exactly the same, except in 2 key places. But these 2 key places are different from Hijichu's situation. Chinlai slowed down his tone and said word by word, the situation on their side is even more unbelievable. First of all, you have to know that half of the people on Blue Planet have ancient virus genes in their genes. They are usually latent and invisible. Only when the conditions are right or when they are stimulated by the outside world will they be expressed, causing various diseases of the immune system. And little Nianji's gene sequence clearly shows that there are 2 nodes of the ancient virus gene hidden in her genes that do not maintain their invisible characteristics. Instead, they are expressed and displayed in her body. Because of this, her body is very weak. Gu Yinran once said that she eavesdropped on Gu Xiangguan and his wife and said that little Nianji would not live past the age of 18. It must be true. This kind of congenital genetic condition is practically carrying a living virus. It's really absurd for her to live past the age of 18. Qinlai slammed the mouse hard. Hua Xiaoheng glanced at him without batting an eyelid. Qinlai immediately withered. He rubbed his hands and said fawningly, "But our Nianji is different. Look at this is our Nianji's gene structure map." On the big screen on the wall, a comparison of gene structure maps appeared. In Hua Xiaoheng's eyes, those long and short pictures looked no different from binary. But in the eyes of an expert, this was the most beautiful picture in the world. I can say that our Nianji's gene structure represents the most perfect combination of human genes. There are no mutations or defects. More importantly, they are all human genes. Hua Xiaoheng was speechless. She's a human. What's so strange about her genes being all human genes? Of course it's strange. Qinlai waved his fists excitedly. I just said that 8% of the genes in the identified human gene map actually come from viruses. 8%. Do you understand? In other words, each of us has more or less non-human genes in our bodies. Hua Xiaoheng, this was really hard to understand and believe. How could there be 8% of virus genes in human genes? Qinlai pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose and explained to Hua Xiaoheng with a flushed face. It's like this. First of all, you have to know what a virus is. It's called a virus in English. In the textbooks, it's stated that a virus is a non-cellular form. It's between a living and non-living body. It's neither living nor non-living. It's mainly made up of a nucleic acid molecule, which is DNA or RNA, and a protein. It infects the host by relying on continuous self-replication to occupy the host's body. When viruses infected humans in ancient times, they could convert their own RNA into DNA and leave it in the ancient human genome. Although the infected humans eventually defeated the virus and survived, these defeated viruses were not completely removed from the human body. The DNA fragments they left in the human genome lurked and were passed down from generation to generation as humans reproduced. Therefore, 8% of the human genes identified by modern humans actually came from ancient viruses. These different viruses embedded in our genomes have different effects on the human body. They can't be generalized. But it can't be denied that these are all external influences. Even if some virus genes have been tamed by the human body and become an indispensable part of the human genome, they are still not of our race, not of our heart. Their lurking is like a ticking time bomb. You don't know when they will explode one day. Some virus genes even determine the extent of the human body's resistance to certain diseases. In this sense, whether you will get those serious diseases is really determined by your genes. Acquired factors don't have much influence. Therefore, to treat certain diseases, the most effective way is to start with genes. But frankly speaking, our current understanding of genes is still too shallow. The technology that can be used to treat diseases at the genetic level is also too backward. The cost is huge and there isn't much effect. But our Nianji's genes are different. Not only do her genes not have any remnants of ancient virus genes, but they are completely human genes. Moreover, they are incomparably healthy and perfect, and they have that powerful function. Qinlai's last sentence was vague, but Hua Xiaoheng understood what he meant. It wasn't strange that there were no mutations or defects in the genes, but not only were there no mutations or defects, but they were all human genes. Moreover, they could repair mutated and defective genes. This was very heaven-defying. Hua Xiaoheng frowned. Is she really that perfect? Things that were too perfect always made people feel that they were illusory and would not last long. It's just that perfect. If you don't agree, hang yourself. Qinlai chuckled and said Gu Nianji's catchphrase. So, our Nianji's DNA is actually different from little Nianji's? Hua Xiaoheng urgently needed to confirm this. Otherwise, he didn't know how to face little Nianji's body, which was about to be escorted back by Yin Shixiang. It's definitely different. Qinlai was very emotional. Although the two of them have exactly the same genes related to Gu Xiangguan, there are still differences between them. This kind of difference is like the difference between the two of them being biological sisters with the same father and mother. But Gu Xiangwen didn't have two daughters. Hua Xiaoheng subconsciously refuted Qinlai's conclusion. Qinlai shrugged and said nonchalantly, I'm purely from a biological point of view. Even if they weren't born to the same parents, it's still possible for such a DNA situation to have a parent-child relationship. Although the probability is very, very small, it's not completely impossible. Hua Xiaoheng thought about this possibility, but Qinlai was shocked by his discovery. Major General Hua, have you ever thought that our Nianji's genes might be the only set in this world that belongs to humans? No wonder it's so perfect. It's so powerful. Qinlai was almost dancing with joy. If only I could give out paper. This is definitely a Nobel Prize level discovery. Hua Xiaoheng couldn't help glancing at him and reminded him, you've made an even greater discovery than this, so wake up. It's already dawn. Stop daydreaming. Qinlai giggled and said emotionally, this discovery is different from other discoveries. This is a discovery that can be made public. Unfortunately, it's on our Nianji, so I still can't say it. Hua Xiaoheng thought about it for a while and silently deleted the video he had just recorded. He then reminded Qinlai, keep this discovery to yourself forever. Just tell the outside world that they're biological sisters. Qinlai looked at Hua Xiaoheng. Although he felt it was a pity, he still nodded. The two of them sat in silence for a while. Qinlai yawned loudly and said, I'm really sleepy. I haven't slept for 3 days. Major General Hua, I'll go back first, okay? Hua Xiaoheng nodded and watched Qinlai leave. He turned his chair around and looked out the window at the morning sun. He thought to himself, where is Nianji now? Are they really getting closer to her step by step? This is today's chapter. Chapter 1462, Perfect Genes. Thank you for your recommendation votes and monthly votes. P.S. I've calculated with my fingers that our Nianji will be rough tomorrow. Mwah. Chapter 1474. After careful consideration, Hua Xiaoheng once again deployed a new direction of action. Time passed nervously. A week later, Yin Shixiang finally returned to the southernmost military port of the Huaxia Empire with the submarine and warship containing little Nianji's body. Like Gu Xiangwen's large submarine, Sirius I little Nianji's small submarine, Sirius II, also stayed at this military base. Two was also left in this military base. Sirius III could finally be placed side by side. Two they could finally be placed side by side. It was still the same huge cave surrounded by cold steel supports. The light of the shadowless lamp poured down from the top and shone on the two submarines, one large and one small. Even the cold incandescence seemed to have softened a little, like a kind father looking at his naughty child with a gentle gaze. The corners of Yin Shixiang's eyes were moist. He took a few photos with his phone. Then he left the military port and boarded a military transport plane back to the imperial capital. Little Nianji's body was placed in an exquisite cherry wood coffin and brought back to the imperial capital. When the military transport plane landed at the imperial capital airport, Hua Xiaoheng called Yi Xian over to welcome them. Yi Xian had specially dressed up today. He was wearing a black tuxedo and a bow tie. His shiny black hair complemented his mixed-race handsome face, adding a sense of charm and beauty. He held a budding rose in his hand and waited for little Nianji's coffin to come down from the plane like he was waiting for his beloved girl's lover. Hua Xiaoheng stood beside him with his hands behind his back, a little speechless. However, this was Yi Xian's matter, so he didn't want to comment. A few soldiers carried the small cherry wood coffin down from the military transport plane, and Yin Shixiang walked at the front. When he passed by Hua Xiaoheng nodded at him. Thank you for your hard work. Yin Shixiang quickly said. It's not hard work. Yi Xian walked over and looked at Yin Shixiang carefully. Sir, can I help her carry the coffin? Send her on her last journey? Yin Shixiang's mouth was half open as he looked at Hua Xiaoheng in surprise. Hua Xiaoheng nodded calmly. Let him send her. Yin Shixiang quickly gave up his position. Yi Xian pinned the rose to his chest and carried little Nianji's cherry wood coffin on his shoulder. He thought to himself, little Nianji, I'll send you back to your parents. With the special approval of the relevant departments of the state, little Nianji was finally buried in the National Martyrs Cemetery as a minor child of a martyr. She was buried with Gu Xiangwen and his wife. The family of three was finally reunited on the land of China. The reason Hua Xiaoheng used was that Gu Xiangwen had two biological daughters, and little Nianji was also his biological daughter. The name on the tombstone is Krina. Ku was the Latin name Hua Xiaoheng had given little Nianji. It had the same meaning as the English name Sirius. He didn't want to see the name Gu Nianji, or Sirius, engraved on the tombstone. Although Gu Yanran insisted that Gu Xiangwen didn't have two daughters, the results of the DNA test were there for all to see. Saying anything more would only make people think that she had ulterior motives and was a habitual liar. Moreover, this kind of result was more acceptable than other results. Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangzi believed it, not to mention General Ji, Speaker Long and Prime Minister Bai. They all agreed with this result. Only Hua Xiaoheng and Chen Lai knew that things weren't that simple. Autumn in the imperial capital was supposed to be the most beautiful season of the year. The sky was often clear and white clouds floated. There were bright red maple leaves both inside and outside the city. However, on the day of little Nianji's burial, it rained in the imperial capital. The evergreen pines and cypresses in the National Martyrs Cemetery were washed green by the rain. Hua Xiaoheng stood in the rain, wearing a formal military uniform and standing with General Ji. Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangzi held the big black umbrella for them on both sides. "Is there any news from Nianji?" General Ji asked softly. The ceremony in front was still going on, but not many people came. It was only a small burial ceremony. Yi Xian took on everything that a family member should do in front. Hua Xiaoheng followed General Ji and stood behind to watch quietly. He shook his head. "I'm still looking." General Ji turned to look at him, patted him on the shoulder, and left without saying anything. Not long after General Ji left, Hua Xiaoheng's phone rang. He had been wearing a Bluetooth headset. When he heard Song Jinning's voice, his heart skipped a beat. "Miss Song, what's the matter?" Song Jinning had been studying the surveillance videos that Hua Xiaoheng and the others had obtained for the past week. With her technical skills and professionalism, coupled with the powerful computing power of the quantum computer, she finally discovered the problem in the surveillance videos. "Xiaoheng, come here for a moment. My technical analysis has come up." Song Jinning's voice was slightly unsteady. Hua Xiaoheng's face twitched involuntarily, and his heart suddenly beat very fast. This was an intuition that he had developed on the battlefield. When a target or danger appeared, he could intuitively sense it. Hua Xiaoheng immediately turned around and walked to his car. What's the result? He had never been so anxious before. He couldn't help but want to know the result on the way. Song Jinning didn't keep him in suspense. She looked at the computer screen in front of her and said excitedly, "There is indeed something wrong with the surveillance video, especially the surveillance video of 4 black SUVs that suddenly appeared. There are traces of an abnormal magnetic field on the image at the same time. The abnormal magnetic field this time is very subtle. It's not as powerful as any abnormal magnetic field we've found before, but it's more precise and leaves no traces. That's why your technical analysis didn't notice it. I didn't notice it when I first analyzed it. Later, after the video was further digitized and analyzed with a quantum computer, I found traces of the abnormal magnetic field. Therefore, just like the day she appeared, the abnormal magnetic field appeared on the day she disappeared." Hua Xiaoheng had an idea. He quickly got into the car and pulled the car door shut with one hand. "Go to the Institute of High Energy Physics." When they arrived at Song Jinning's Institute of High Energy Physics, Hua Xiaoheng sat beside her and watched her explain the surveillance video from 3 weeks ago frame by frame on the computer. "Look, this is the abnormal fluctuation that appeared on the screen 3 weeks ago when the 18-wheeler truck blocked the camera. Did you see it? Even without high-definition digital processing, the image will blur and jump for a few seconds at this time. Although it's very short and the human eye might not be able to see it, the instrument can capture it." Hua Xiaoheng agreed. "Our technicians noticed this phenomenon, but after analysis, they think that this is just a common focus problem for ordinary cameras." Song Jinning replied with an "oh," and said regretfully, "This is indeed a common problem with ordinary cameras, but if your technicians have done in-depth research on abnormal magnetic fields, they will be able to tell that this isn't a blur and jump caused by the focus problem of ordinary cameras." She paused. "This is the fluctuation caused by the abnormal magnetic field that affects the focus of the camera." Song Jinning patiently pointed with the mouse for Hua Xiaoheng to see. "Look here again." When the 18-wheeler truck drove away and the 4 black SUVs suddenly appeared and drove in 4 directions, the abnormal magnetic field disappeared. This means that the 4 cars are just a cover. What really happened in the few seconds when the 18-wheeler truck blocked the camera. She paused and looked a little unnatural. "It was just a few seconds. What do you think happened?" "Yes, what exactly happened in the few seconds 3 weeks ago?" On that day 3 weeks ago, Gu Nianji hadn't been unconscious for long. She quickly regained consciousness. Her head was still a little dizzy, but she had already regained her senses. However, she didn't open her eyes and remained motionless. Everything that had just happened was too shocking to her. The image of Xiao Yi lying on the floor covered in blood kept replaying in her mind. Her heart tightened and felt sad. It was like a huge rock was weighing heavily on her heart. She kept praying that Major General Hua and the others would discover the abnormality in her apartment in time and save Xiao Yi. After praying anxiously, her thoughts returned to herself. When she thought about it, she was instantly furious. Damn it. She had actually been kidnapped. The other party had actually said that they wanted to take her home. Which lunatic asylum hadn't closed the door properly and let these lunatics out? How dare they kidnap her in the Wuxia Empire? These people were either crazy or idiots. When Major General Hua caught them, he would definitely cut them into pieces. Gunyanji thought angrily. Her eyelids quietly lifted. Her thick and long eyelashes trembled slightly and opened a tiny gap. She wanted to see where she was. Major General Hua and the others should be able to find her soon. She was very confident of that. But before that, she had to have a clear understanding of her situation. She didn't know if her phone was still there, but even if she didn't have her phone's GPS, she still had the GPS that Hua Xiaoheng had specially installed for her. Just as her eyelids opened a slit, a strong and blinding ray of sunlight shone on her, instantly stinging her eyes. Gunyanji instinctively closed her eyes. The intense light stung her so much that tears involuntarily flowed out of her eyes. What was this place? How could there be such strong sunlight? Gunyanji recalled the weather in the imperial capital and began to feel that something was wrong. No matter how strong the sunlight in the imperial capital was, it couldn't be so pure and scorching. The light was burning her eyes like a high temperature. Her eyes were about to go blind from looking at him. Gunyanji's entire body stiffened. She still didn't dare to open her eyes. She only relied on her ears and the feeling of her skin to sense her surroundings. It was very quiet beside her and the temperature wasn't high. It was very comfortable. She was sitting and the seat under her. Why did it feel like a car seat? Gunyanji became even more nervous. She remembered that year when she was kidnapped in the Königssee suburb of Munich, Germany. Could it be the same situation? But Seth and his stepfather seemed to be dead, right? Could it be that his mother had come to the Wuxia Empire to avenge him and her husband? Gunyanji thought about it aimlessly and waited quietly for a while. It was terrifyingly quiet beside her. She couldn't feel anyone else beside her at all. Where were those cruel and brainless kidnappers? Was he going to leave her here alone? Where was she? This is the first update of the day, Chapter 1463, Where is she? A reminder for everyone's recommendation votes and monthly votes. Today is Monday, especially the recommendation votes. P.S. There will be a second update at 8 o'clock p.m. for Beth 1211 who was promoted to the leader last August. Mwah. Chapter 1475. After hesitating for a few minutes, Gunyanji finally quietly opened her eyes again. This time, perhaps her eyes had adapted to the light just now, or the angle of the sunlight had changed. In short, when she opened her eyes this time, the strong light didn't continue to shine directly into her eyes. She finally opened her eyes fully and quickly looked around her. She found herself sitting in the passenger seat of a car, but there was no one in the driver's seat beside her, nor was there anyone in the back seat. As expected, there was no one around her. She was the only person in the car. It was very hot in the car and she didn't know if the air conditioner was turned on. Gunyanji looked up and saw an invincible view of the sea in front of her. Gunyanji sucked in a breath of cold air and widened her eyes in disbelief. No wonder the sunlight was so dazzling just now. It was the sun by the sea. The indigo blue sea stretched out in front of her, and it was so vast that it was frightening. The beach covered with fine white sand stretched out in front of her, and there were tall coconut trees by the side of the road with large coconuts hanging from them. Just between the beach and the sea stood a tall black-haired man wearing a neat black suit. It was obviously the same clothes worn by the previous kidnappers. However, looking at his back and standing posture, her intuition told her that this person was a soldier. She didn't know which of the kidnappers he was. She still clearly remembered the appearance of the 4 kidnappers. Then what about the others? Where were they hiding? Gunyanji didn't dare to act rashly. She raised her hand slightly to look at her watch. It should have only been 15 minutes since she was kidnapped from her apartment. So how did she get from the intersection of the 3rd ring road of the imperial capital to this beach in 15 minutes? Gunyanji looked around and found that as far as she could see, there was only the vast sea. So this was an island? She muttered to herself and looked down at the rope that was strangling her tightly. It turned out to be the seat belt in the car. She reached out and tried to unfasten the seat belt. With a click, the seat belt was unfastened just like that. Gunyenji was excited. Did the kidnappers think too little of her so they didn't really tie her up, or did they think she wouldn't wake up so soon so they didn't tie her up? Gunyenji thought about it as she quietly tried to open the car door. She didn't expect that no matter how hard she tried, the door wouldn't budge. After trying for a long time, Gunyenji finally stopped. It turned out that the kidnappers didn't tie her up not because they didn't care about her, nor because they thought she wouldn't wake up so soon, but because they had other precautions. Lock the car door. Even if she woke up, she would be fine. Gunyenji squinted at the lock on the car door and snorted internally. Do you think a car lock can lock me? How naive. Gunyenji raised her hand to touch her earlobe, and the corners of her mouth suddenly twitched. Where were her diamond earrings? That was the GPS device Wuxia had ordered for her. Where did it fall to? Gunyenji suddenly panicked. She slipped out of the car seat and fumbled around in the compartment. After searching for a long time, he couldn't even find a single diamond chip. Where are her earrings? Could it have fallen on the road? Gunyenji was really anxious now. Her previous confidence and calmness were all based on the foundation that Wuxia would find her soon. Now that she realized that they might not be able to find her so easily, she couldn't help but feel nervous. His eyelids started twitching uncontrollably. Was it the left eyelid twitching for wealth, and the right eyelid twitching for disaster? Or was it the right eyelid twitching for wealth, and the left eyelid twitching for disaster? She couldn't tell anymore. She reached into her pocket with one hand and found that her phone was still there. That was good. Gunyenji quickly took out her phone again. After pressing for a long time, she found that her phone had run out of battery. It was clearly still 100% charged in the morning, but after 15 minutes, it had run out of battery? This was this year's new Apple phone. Could it be that it had also encountered a battery problem? Gunyenji thought about it for a while and put the phone back into her pocket. What the hell was going on? Could it be that this time was even more dangerous than the time in the German Alps? Gunyenji sat back in her seat in a daze and suddenly noticed that the man standing on the beach in front of her, looking at the sea, suddenly moved as if he was about to turn around. She quickly fastened her seat belt again, closed her eyes again and pretended to be unconscious. She couldn't run out and she didn't know where the kidnappers were. In a moment of desperation, it was better to stay still than to move. She closed her eyes and waited in the car for a while. Then she heard the door on the driver's side open. Someone got in the car and sat in the driver's seat. Gunyenji couldn't help feeling nervous, but she still tried her best to maintain her previous posture and sat motionlessly in the seat. After the person sat in, he suddenly slammed the steering wheel hard and gritted his teeth. What kind of F***king high-tech is this? They're all a bunch of useless people. Gunyenji's body stiffened even more, and beads of sweat gradually seeped out of her forehead. The person sat quietly for a while and glanced at Gunyenji, just in time to see her eyelids move twice. Stop pretending. Aren't you awake? The person turned his head and spoke to Gunyenji dryly. Gunyenji, she slowly opened her eyes. Her jade-like eyes gradually emerged from the 2 rows of thick and slender eyelashes. It was like 2 sparkling stars had suddenly appeared in the dark night sky. They were large, translucent, and moving. The person only glanced at them before looking away. He lowered his head and took out a cigarette. He lit it in his mouth and took a puff. Then he opened the window and shook the ash onto the beach outside the car. This person should be the man in black who had been standing on the beach and looking into the distance, right? Gunyenji quickly glanced at the spot in front of the car. Sure enough, the man was no longer there. She retracted her gaze and suppressed her racing heart. She also quietly sized up the man. The man was quite good-looking. His facial features were a little like Hijichu's, but he was much more muscular than Hijichu. Hijichu was a handsome and elegant young master who didn't eat the food of the world, but this man had a strong aura of the mortal world. He wasn't one of the 4 kidnappers. However, although this person wasn't one of the 4 kidnappers, he was wearing the same clothes as them. Therefore, this person must also be one of the kidnappers. In other words, there weren't only 4 people who had attacked her this time. There was a 5th person. This person was the most cunning and had been hiding behind the scenes, right? But how did he manage to bring her from the intersection of the 3rd ring road to this island in less than 15 minutes? This was simply too inconceivable. Sensing Gunyenji looking at him, The man switched the cigarette in his hand from his right hand to his left. He placed it on the window and held the steering wheel with his right hand. He turned his head to look at her. This was Gunyenji? 7 years ago she wasn't like this, she had really changed a lot. He looked at her for a long time without batting an eyelid. Then he took out a photo from his pocket and compared it to Gunyenji. Gunyenji glanced at the photo in the man's hand and the corners of her mouth twitched. She finally said, "Who are you? Should I call you Kidnapper A or Passerby A?" The man raised an eyebrow and seemed a little surprised. "Are you really Gunyenji? You don't recognize me?" "Of course I don't know you. Do I know you that well?" Gunyenji raised her head and rolled her eyes. Although her eyes were rolled to the sky, she was thinking nervously in her mind. She wasn't as arrogant and pretentious as she appeared to be. This person knew her name and seemed to be very familiar with her. The kidnappers had also said that they would take her home, so who had sent them? Gunyenji's heart was pounding and she had a vague guess. However, this guess made her feel especially heavy when she thought about how those people had shot Xiao Yi several times without hesitation and cruelly. Could these people have something to do with the memories she had forgotten? She stared at the man, and the darkness in her eyes deepened. It was like a storm was brewing in the dark sky. "Looks like it's true that you lost your memory." The man handed the photo in his hand to Gunyenji. "Look at the photo of you when you were young. It's completely different from now. If they hadn't confirmed it, I would have thought they had the wrong person." Gunyenji glanced at the photo. It was a photo she had never seen before. The person in the photo was indeed what she looked like when she was young. She was still hugging the doll and sitting on the swing in the garden. She was looking up and smiling at a man. The man was pushing the swing behind her. It looked like Hijichu. Gunyenji suppressed the uneasiness and fear in her heart. She smiled and said with a hint of grievance, "I'm sorry, you really have the wrong person. Please let me go. Look at the person in this photo. He's completely different from me." This was the second update of the day, Chapter 1464, I'm not familiar with you. A reminder to all of you for your recommendation votes and monthly votes. Today is Monday, especially the recommendation votes. P.S. This update was sent to Beth1211, who was promoted to the leader of the Alliance last August. Mwah. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.